Thea in the DC Universe. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 401 Merlyn's Sword. Dr. Thea's first order of business upon taking office was to assemble a security force and coordinate relations. How? Just talk? The committee must have its own armed forces. After much deliberation, the Guard was capped at a full strength of 5,000 men, effectively the armed forces under the committee's control. Finally, Thea had some visible military support. After all, there was a limit to the number of bodyguards. 100 men was already excessive, any more was unsuitable. Now officially approved, Thea directly recruited over 500 people from Deathstroke's inner circle, recruiting them under various pretexts. These individuals would serve as the backbone of the Guard for a long time to come. She also targeted several alien cities, finding the most populous. Thea and Phyra, Atomite, infiltrated them, brainwashing and insinuating themselves into several leaders. They fabricated a story in which Phyra, having left Earth, was stranded on another planet and subsequently abducted by Brainiac. The future governing council would have 7 seats, 3 would be held by representatives of the alien cities, and 4 would be held by Earthlings. Among the Earthlings, Thea holds a seat, the Sky Eye Society holds a seat, the government holds a seat, and the military holds a seat. Thea aims to strengthen her voice, publicly winning over a few representatives while secretly interfering with the aliens. She wants to firmly control this armed force. While the restrictions are numerous, the benefits are equally significant. All weapons except nuclear bombs can be deployed. To prevent the aliens from developing special abilities, the Sky Eye Society has also provided some of its hidden, undisclosed technologies to the committee: anti-gravity microplastic energy grids, electromagnetic signal isolation chambers, and quantum cages. Both Amanda and Steve Trevor of the Sky Eye Society are quite cunning, having slightly misinterpreted the resolution and provided Thea with only defensive equipment. Of course, Thea refuses to accept this. Now that she has the support of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, she has instant access to the president's office. She's not afraid of the Sky Eye Society. She'll pull in a congressman today, a general tomorrow, using both soft and hard tactics. The Sky Eye Society is powerless and can only provide the blueprints for an advanced laser gun. We don't have the finished product yet, they say. You'll have to research it yourself. Thea wasn't satisfied. I'll develop the finished product myself, and who'll own it then? This is a scientific research assignment, not a concession, so what do you want? Amanda thought Thea was indeed easier to talk to than other superheroes, but that was both a strength and a weakness. Other superheroes, like Batman, came and went in a flash, talking and leaving immediately. Who could possibly sit in her office for 3 hours? I want to visit the Black Room, Thea stated her conditions. Amanda thought for a moment and shook her head. No one with superpowers can enter the Black Room. That's the iron rule of the AOM Society. Any visit was just an excuse to grab a few items. She couldn't keep track of them all, so she couldn't open that loophole. Thea scoffed. In the future, the AOM Society would face a formidable enemy, and Constantine would go in. She hadn't heard of any iron rules. These people wouldn't cry until they saw the coffin. But she didn't want to push Amanda too hard. Some of the things in the Black Room were truly outrageous. From a broad perspective, it was a wise decision to ban those with superpowers. How about this? I won't go in. You take it out for me. I only want one thing in there. Thea lowered her demands. What is it? Let's make it clear, I can't give you the dangerous ones. Amanda was helpless. A superhero was constantly playing administrative tricks on her, hitting her sore spot, and it was making her feel utterly horrified. The headquarters of the AII was right there, leaving her with nowhere to hide. Merlyn's sword. Thea naturally wouldn't mention Dr. Fate's helmet, the Dark Heart of the Eclipse, or the tank shrouded in the Speed Force. She either didn't understand or couldn't control those things. They weren't suitable for her now. If she remembered correctly, Merlyn's staff was also stored in the Black Room. She weighed the 2 weapons for a long time, and finally, following a certain intuition, chose the sword. Merlyn's sword. Amanda, a common person, encountered these things daily. Though she was a commoner, her vision surpassed that of many extraordinary beings. In her mind, These weapons were useless in the hands of ordinary people, even extraordinary beings, and only worked with those with special bloodlines. This gave her a rough idea of Thea's bloodline. After considering the sword's apparent uselessness, Amanda weighed the pros and cons, finally nodding and whispering, "This time, it's not the eye of heaven that's helping you. Remember, I'm personally helping you." Thea smiled, saying nothing. The favor wasn't difficult to repay. Amanda's ability to commit suicide was second only to Lois Lane. Superman wouldn't come to her rescue, so she could just offer a hand. After waiting for half an hour, Amanda handed Thea a long box. The call of her bloodline couldn't be faked. Thea didn't open the box then and there, choosing to leave alone, much to Amanda's disappointment. Returning to her residence, she finally opened a pristine box. Its ornate, antique-inspired decorations revealed its immense value. Opening the lid, she revealed a nearly transparent sword. Grasping the hilt, Thea pulled it out, delicately flicking her wrist and striking 2 sword strokes. Its lightness and fluidity, its toughness and strength perfectly balanced, made Thea exclaim, "A fine sword." Thea had seen several such swords before, from Diana's Vulcan sword to her own Godslayer sword. Both were artifacts of the highest quality. While the sword of Merlyn was a less formidable weapon in its forging materials, the tangible connection it possessed made it exponentially more powerful in Thea's hands. It was a traditional English longsword, 90 centimeters long, with a cross-shaped handle and no superfluous ornamentation. As it wielded its blade, the transparent blade emitted a faint blue glow, a natural reaction to the magical energy in the air. Xia channeled her own magical energy into the sword, and the faint blue light instantly turned it deep blue. The blade vibrated, invisible to the naked eye, and if one listened closely, a faint chi-chi sound could be heard. With a flick of her wrist, she swept the sword upward through the air, a deep blue flash of sword light. The metal frame 10 meters away was directly severed. Xia examined the cut. It was clean and smooth, not like the result of a sword, but rather the product of modern mechanical processing such as water jet cutting or wire cutting. Aligning the 2 ends and examining them carefully in the sunlight, the cut was very small, the sword light as thin as a piece of paper, cutting the metal with ease. She channeled her various attributes into the sword one by one. Overall, the sword was very tolerant, but there were subtle differences between the various attributes, such as the light attribute being faster, the dark attribute being more concealed, and so on. Chapter 402, The Control Committee and the Marriage of 2 Middle-Aged People. In addition to its standard magical attacks, Merlyn's sword also possesses 2 advanced spells, an ice storm and greater invisibility. Thea knows both spells herself, but using the sword doesn't consume her own magic. In the real world, magic ignores both friend and foe, so ice storm isn't practical. However, greater invisibility is a useful spell for home and travel. The sword also possesses a remarkable property: it imbues a subtle element of luck, subtly altering the wearer's fortune. After a long time of experimenting, Thea couldn't figure out how it worked, but, believing it was better to believe it than not, she decided to carry it with her. In modern society, carrying a nearly meter-long sword around daily is definitely not feasible. Fortunately, our ancestor was a god of magic, not a sword master. He considered this for future generations. Those of Merlyn's bloodline can transform the sword into an ornament. Thea chose a necklace. The cross-shaped sword shrank around her neck, so from a distance it looked like a cross. Coordinating with the alien city managers took little time. All 7 cities were on the brink of collapse. 3 of them were even less civilized than Earth, barely at the level of the Renaissance. Thea led thousands of atomized people into these cities, employing all sorts of cutting-edge technology that truly terrified them. 2 other cities were similar in size to Earth, but with populations of only a few thousand, and they wouldn't dare attack an entire planet. The remaining 2 cities, more advanced than Earth, had already developed their own pseudo-AIS, but were now under Brainiac's control, having ripped them apart before Thea and her team entered. The sight of a tablet now gave them a frightening shudder, and the sight of a laptop gave them a spike in blood pressure. Thea unexpectedly harvested a significant amount of fear energy from them, demonstrating just how much they were frightened by Brainiac. Fyra's infiltration was easy. She simply rewrote a few people's memories. They all agreed that it was Fyra, stranded on their planet, who had led them in destroying the pseudo-AIS. They elected her as their representative, securing a seat on the committee for Thea. The government seat was confirmed to be held concurrently by Kentucky Congresswoman Joan Finch, a middle-aged woman who was a political ally of Moira's and the rotating chairperson of the Anti-Superhuman Committee. She was generally friendly with Thea. The military representative was General Ryan, an old acquaintance of Thea's. Of the 3 alien seats, Thea took one, the government one, and the military one. The remaining AOLC seat remained undecided. 2 weeks later, perhaps due to concerns about balancing various factors, Amanda's appointment was shelved and replaced by Steve Trevor. The government was primarily responsible for funding, AOLC was responsible for advanced weaponry, the military for conventional weapons, and Thea for personnel. She was also forthright in promoting her own bodyguard, John Diggle, to the position of military director. Lila Michaels undoubtedly hoped her husband would rise to prominence. What future would a life as a bodyguard hold? Despite being Amanda's staunch supporter, this didn't stop her from maneuvering through her connections within the AOLC, convincing Steve Trevor and securing approval from within the organization. The military took into account Diggle's background in the Kandahar Special Forces, while the government considered the black man's skin color. All parties were pleased with his selection. While the black man had been a bit of a slacker on Team Arrow in the original timeline, he actually possessed considerable military skills and was a standard soldier, a skill that wouldn't be fully utilized as a superhero. He now arrived at his new post with high energy, leading by example and meticulously training the 2,000 previously recruited soldiers. It would take time to unify this force, but with Thea and her promoted personnel in the foreground, and the mercenaries controlled by Fyra and Deathstroke working in the background, controlling this committee, and perhaps even developing it into a World Security Council like the Marvel Universe, would be a straightforward undertaking given the increasingly challenging times ahead. Thea, who had expected to spend the weekend in the area, received a call and flew back to Star City. She was back for a wedding. Hilariously, it wasn't just some young couple's wedding, it was Felicity's mother marrying Laurel's father. Thea wasn't initially surprised by the news. She remembered the two of them having a passing interest in the show, though nothing further developed. But in this time and space, Felicity and Laurel already knew each other, and their parents also knew each other. With one husband in prison and the other divorced, the two middle-aged people unexpectedly hit it off, quickly hatching marriage plans. Rushing back to the Quinn mansion, Moira, as the mayor of Star City, had to be there to congratulate Detective Lance. Thea, as a friend of Felicity and Laurel, had to be there. Oliver had reconnected with Shadow, and Thea even noticed he was living in Shadow's apartment. Of course, Oliver's excuse was that he was caring for old Yago's daughter. Shadow was a Star City police officer, so Oliver, as a friend of the police, had to be there. While the three of them had different reasons for their visit, they shared the same destination, the church. The church wasn't crowded, but Thea knew quite a few people. Her immediate sight was the tall, melancholic figure in a perfectly tailored suit, Bruce Wayne. "Why are you here?" Thea asked quietly. "Detective Lance has invited quite a few police officers, so I'm considered one now. Besides, I know Laurel and Felicity," Batman said in a grand manner, lowering his voice only at the end. Thea looked closer and saw it was true. Detective Lance was chatting with old Gordon. A tall, black man with a buzz cut was also speaking next to them. Judging by his rank, he was also a detective. "Who's that black man over there?" Thea looked, not recognizing him, and turned to Batman. "Joe West, a dedicated detective in Central City," Batman said seriously. Thea understood. Wasn't that Barry Allen's father-in-law? Detective Lance had quite the social circle. Giving Batman a glimpse of his head, Thea stepped aside, having spotted Felicity and Barbara. "Hey, how do you feel about having a stepfather and a sister?" Thea jokingly patted Felicity on the shoulder. Felicity's face was filled with a look of unsettlement, her mouth half open and her eyes lacking their usual sparkle. It was clear this sudden event had caught her off guard. While she wouldn't object, she wasn't prepared to fully approve. The key point was that she knew both Inspector Lance and Laurel. And now they were suddenly family. The IT woman was at a loss for words. Thea watched the excitement from the sidelines, grinning. Felicity had no idea Sarah Lance was still alive. She hadn't found any trace of Sarah Lance during the previous battle at Nandarbet. It wasn't surprising that she'd been dragged out for special training by Talia's sister, Nisha. Felicity was a few months younger than Laurel and 2 years older than Sarah Lance. The gathering of the three would surely be even more lively. Chapter 403 Barry Allen. The three women chatted and laughed, mostly Thea and Barbara teasing Felicity. Shortly thereafter, Laurel arrived. She was accompanied by Thea's other brother, Tommy Merlyn. The two had truly forged a formidable relationship amidst the bloodshed of Gotham. As crime fighters, their hidden aura was even greater than Shadow's in Star City. As the leader of the Birds of Prey, Barbara naturally went to greet them. But she stopped after just 2 steps when she saw Oliver, holding Shadow's hand, sideways, blocking the two. Laurel, Tommy, seeing his best friend and former love hand in hand, Oliver felt uncertain, but he couldn't pretend not to know them, so he stepped forward and greeted them warmly. Oliver, similar to his thoughts, Laurel and Tommy weren't sure how to face him. While the news had been dominated by Thea's rescue of Metropolis, there had been some news of Oliver's return from the island, and they had undoubtedly caught on to it, which was the reason they hadn't returned to Star City. Longing, guilt, and an old relationship, friendship, and love, all mixed together, a complex mix that even they themselves couldn't fathom. "I heard your brother was having an affair with Laurel's sister. How promiscuous," Barbara, watching from afar, remarked to Thea with some disapproval. "This wasn't even close," Thea muttered to herself. Felicity from the original time, and Helena, the huntress who wasn't with your Birds of Prey today, were both involved with Oliver. Several women knew he loved Laurel, yet they all forgave him. What a charming attribute, Barbara had said. Let it be. She hadn't expected Thea to join her in cursing Oliver. Seeing the awkward atmosphere between the four of them, she quickly dragged Thea and Felicity over to join in the fun. The addition of the three of them livened up the atmosphere, and all 7 of them seemed to be somehow connected. Laurel was actually a bit uncomfortable with the idea of a remarried family, but she was always so generous and had no problem with Felicity. Felicity was a bit of a homebody in private, but having been the vice president of the Quinn Group for several years, she was quite capable in public situations. A few jokes created a somewhat harmonious atmosphere between the sisters. "Thea, did you meet Sarah on Inferno Island?" Oliver asked quietly, pulling Thea out of the crowd. Thea's high intelligence allowed her to recall the experience in a tenth of a second. She had rescued Sarah and then boarded the Waverider, where the future Sarah had left her to Nyssa. In other words, Oliver hadn't seen Sarah on Inferno Island, so he probably didn't know she was still alive. Involving time travel, the Waverider, and a whole bunch of other shit, Thea thought for a moment and finally told Oliver part of the truth. "I did see Sarah, but I got into a lot of trouble later and lost her. If nothing goes wrong, she should still be alive. Can you use those magic to find her?" "No, I can find you because of our bloodline. It would be hard to find Sarah in such a huge crowd, and I don't learn divination magic." Thea flatly rejected Oliver's suggestion. It wouldn't be a bad thing for Sarah to get some training. The way she stole her sister's boyfriend showed how bad her character was when she was young. Thea had just met her and wanted her to go out of her way to find her, but she was against it. "Hi, hello, I don't mean to overhear your conversation. Are you looking for someone? I'm a crime scene investigator, maybe I can help you." Before the siblings could finish their words, a very charming voice interrupted them. A young man with a bright face and a tall figure smiled and extended his hand to the two. "Barry Allen, investigator, Criminal Investigations Division, Central City Police Department." The brother and sister shook his hand and introduced themselves, becoming acquainted. Oliver felt very comfortable with the young man, and his liking for him grew. Thea was at a loss for words. Was Joe West upset that Star City had enjoyed peace and stability in recent years, and that Detective Lance had received a significant salary increase? He even dragged someone as remotely related as Barry Allen into the fray. Barry Allen was actually quite distressed. Joe West had kindly brought him out to meet his colleagues in the police force. Although they weren't in the same city, they had a common network of information, and there was no telling when he might need help from a sister city police department. At this point, Barry Allen, not yet the Flash, had visited several senior police officers, especially the leading figure like Gordon, and found himself with nothing to do. He happened to see Thea and the other young people chatting and decided to join in the fun. Thea didn't want to get too involved in the speedster's affairs, so she exchanged a few words, leaving the conversation to Oliver, with whom she had a natural compatibility. Soon, Tommy, feeling surrounded by women, joined the conversation. 8 people, 5 women and 3 men, began chatting. "Ollie, is that your sister? The hero who saved Metropolis?" After just a few words, Oliver and Barry Elu became familiar with each other. Barry saw Thea surrounded by women. Even though she tried to hide her presence, her aura and grace overwhelmed everyone else, like the moon in the night sky, calm, reserved, yet undeniable. Oliver took a sip of his wine, his heart overflowing with pride for his sister. Yet, I heard Metropolis has started to cast a bronze statue of her. Are there really aliens? I heard their sudden disappearance was caused by aliens. Metropolis had vanished for a week without a trace, and that couldn't be concealed. The US government wasn't so reckless as to claim it was their doing. Aliens were their response to the outside world. Barry had spent years investigating his mother's death. The eerie red lightning recurred in his dreams, and he desperately sought answers, unraveling the truth about the night his mother died. Being a skilled crime scene investigator didn't help him uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Metropolis suddenly vanished from the world. During that week, Barry secretly journeyed to the sealed-off former side of Metropolis, intent on uncovering its secrets. Aliens could explain the mysteries he'd been harboring for over a decade, but only one question remained: why? Why him? And not someone else? Oliver pondered Barry's question. He knew something about the aliens. Thea was in charge of coordinating all alien affairs, and she hadn't hidden it from her family. With over 100,000 aliens, they wouldn't remain confined to a small area forever. Like after-dinner conversation, Thea shared a few details about the aliens with her family. Initially, Oliver was devastated. He could accept Superman, after all, since there was only one. But now, with over 100,000 suddenly appearing, his worldview is truly shaken. The Flash is here too, with Green Arrow and the Flash teaming up to ask for votes. All the Justice League members are here. Cyborg, what about me? I haven't appeared yet. Thea, who are you? Go play football, please give me your monthly votes and recommend. Chapter 404 Brothers Discussion. Barry, I heard from Thea that there are indeed quite a few aliens. They're intelligent beings like us, even survivors like the citizens of Metropolis. Oliver revealed some of his selective knowledge, but, unsure of Barry's intentions, he didn't specify the number. The two had just met, and their conversation was brief and intimate. Oliver was reserved, and Barry wouldn't reveal his own concerns. The conversation quickly shifted to other topics. Barry's imagination was quite impressive, linking his mother's case to aliens. Thea, who had been eavesdropping on their conversation, pondered the matter for a moment before dismissing it. She felt the Reverse Flash was the one to worry about, not her. The wedding was a warm and welcoming one. Although the guests were small, the atmosphere was incredibly lively. Inspector Lance could hardly have imagined that a simple man with a lifelong career in the police force would be graced with a wedding attended by a group of male and female superheroes, half of them from Earth. Inspector Lance was filled with joy, feeling the beauty of life. After the wedding, Oliver and Tommy walked together. The two friends had so much to talk about. Seeing this, Thea remembered something and grabbed Laurel, who was about to leave. As Laurel looked puzzled, Thea handed her a silver suitcase. You know my ability, right? This is for Tommy. I've been unsure how to give it to him. Please give it to him. Seeing Laurel's eyes shift from confusion to surprise, Thea thought she might have misunderstood. You're overthinking it. Actually, Tommy is my half-brother. This was too difficult to explain. Thea felt that she would rather fight Brainiac for 800 rounds than have to admit such an embarrassing thing. It was all old Ma's fault. He vaguely brushed aside the elder's matter and explained the injections to Laurel. If Tommy asks, don't tell him I gave them to you. You know their relationship was terrible, and it's only just starting to improve. If Tommy knew about his father's incident, the consequences would be unpredictable. Laurel's not-so-clever mind pondered the relationships between them. She simply said, your social circle is really messed up, or, looking at it another way, whether she chose Oliver or Tommy, Thea was still her relative. A little dizzy, Thea took the suitcase, feeling relieved. Just like Oliver, Tommy could inject himself or give Laurel the injections. It was his choice. They were adults, and Thea wouldn't interfere. After the wedding, the women went shopping and beauty treatments together. When they returned to Thea's secret base, they found Oliver and Tommy there too. They were ostensibly there to exchange ideas, but the real meaning was only understood by them. The women splashed out their bags, each in a cheerful mood. Thanks to Star City's excellent security and the naturally booming population, Star City has become one of the few safe and stable cities. Who'll win? Felicity, the only one who doesn't know martial arts, bought the most. After putting her things away and watching the intense fighting, she quietly asked Thea. Honestly, this was the first time Thea had ever seriously watched Tommy in action. She only had to watch for a moment and knew Tommy was no match for Oliver. This was an era without internal strength and accumulation. Fighting techniques were limited, and how they were applied after learning them depended entirely on individual performance. Deathstroke's Kali martial arts were learned in the Philippines, but Thea was confident that even the founder of the martial art couldn't defeat Deathstroke. It was all about the human element. Oliver's fighting talent was exceptional. The fact that the late ninja master abandoned Batman and sought Green Arrow as his successor showed Oliver's personal value. Without all the technological gadgets, his combat effectiveness was only slightly inferior to Batman's. Green Arrow, an ordinary man, became the 8th member of the Justice League, not simply by sheer popularity. His strength was proven by history. Tommy's talent was far inferior to Oliver's. Despite his evident training and the hardships he'd endured in Gotham over the past year, his innate nature determined that without a significant opportunity, he would remain a middling hero. Most devastatingly, Thea saw that Oliver had been injected with divine blood, and his sheer physical prowess overpowered Tommy. Logically, Oliver should have finished the fight within 20 moves, but of course, he couldn't treat his good brother that way. He slowed down his pace, much like Thea had done the other day, and the two of them practiced well together. Tommy spun in midair, drew his arrow, aimed, and fired. The movement was incredibly smooth and beautiful, a testament to his dedication. Oliver didn't block the shot head-on, but sidestepped to the left. He hadn't anticipated Tommy's lack of balance, and he fired another arrow midair. This time, Oliver had no time to dodge, so he had to scoop it up with his right hand, preparing to catch it. His lack of experience was evident. Thea saw that the arrow's power and angle were perfect, and Oliver was a bit overconfident, so he couldn't catch it. A tangible, yet intangible, yellow light flashed in his eyes, and he struck the arrow head first, striking it directly. With a slight tremor, the arrow vanished into thin air, as if it had never existed. Tommy's arrow sent him plummeting to the ground. Oliver reached out to grab it, but it was empty. They both looked toward the doorway, only to discover a group of women watching the spectacle. The two men felt a little awkward. Oliver pulled Tommy up and said to Thea, "Your base is pretty good." Yeah, it was originally yours, so of course you think it's good." Thea stared at him speechlessly. "Ollie, what are your plans for the future?" Thea still wanted to ask him his true thoughts. After all, Star City had changed so much. While there were certainly criminals, they weren't many. Oliver, who had been home for a few days, had also pondered this question. His original plan was to eliminate the bad guys in his little notebook, to stop the killing by killing. That was his current belief. But under Thea's wing, Star City has changed dramatically in recent years. Malcolm, the big boss, vanished, leaving behind a handful of smaller players, some changing careers, some moving to other cities. It's safe to say that less than a third of the people listed in his roster remain. Moira controls the city. While her influence isn't as strong as Malcolm's, she's still capable of spreading messages. With Detective Lance publicly fighting crime and Shadow and Felicity secretly helping, Star City's safety isn't the best in the country, but it's undoubtedly among the best. Shadow has repeatedly warned Oliver not to kill, leaving Green Arrow feeling a bit lost and with little to do. Especially with Barbara back in Gotham. Batman's team, and Laurel and Tommy back in Star City, the four heroes, 2 men and 2 women, are glaring at each other, making it difficult to find a troublemaker. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 405 Oliver's New Enemy. It seemed as if the heavens had heard their cries. Less than a week later, Shadow, who worked at the police station, brought them good news. Finally, a fearless villain had surfaced in Star City. The idle men cheered with joy. No matter what he was up to, they beat the crap out of him first. This guy's called Brick Wall. Limited information suggests he's been secretly gathering the Star City underworld. The police once rounded him up, but he seemed to have invulnerability, and he eventually fought his way out, Shadow said briefly. Of course, Thea had already stated that her current protection area was Metropolis, leaving Star City to you. Shadow, Laurel, and Tommy unanimously elected Oliver as the leader of their small team. Whether to appear more compatible with Shadow or simply to show a more forgiving side, Oliver still chose the codename Green Arrow. With a wealth of advanced technology, Thea naturally wouldn't let Oliver go out and fight monsters in a green cape and painted eyes like a panda, as he did in the first season of Arrow. His suit was a high-density Kevlar suit, painted green at his request, just as good as the Batsuit. His bow and arrows were American-style split-piece hunting bows with 150 pounds of tension. He didn't want high-tech skateboard arrows like Shadow's. He simply saw Tommy had grappling arrows modeled after Batman's grappling gun, so he made a few of his own for his journey. Without Thea's help, the four heroes headed for their target location with unwavering confidence. Half an hour later, Thea. Come check on Tommy. He looks like he's been poisoned, Oliver shouted breathlessly as he ran into the base, hugging his friend. Thea, who was developing a new armor system using the body of the cheetah god on the inner chamber, hurried out to investigate. It's true that he was poisoned, but it seems that you were also shot, Thea checked. Tommy's lips were blue and purple, his face was pale, and the wound under his ribs was oozing black blood. It was obviously a gunshot wound. Oliver was also shot on the shoulder. He probably reacted quickly and turned sideways, so the bullet passed through his shoulder. A simple bandage was enough. Why was Tommy and I shot at the same time? But I'm fine, Oliver asked puzzled. What do you think I injected you with? It's just a little poison on the bullet, huh? Thea said without turning her head. Tommy must not have been injected with a divine blood yet, otherwise he wouldn't be so miserable. Thea's fingers lightly swept through the air, and several mysterious runes were slapped into Tommy's body. After a moment, she telekinetically extracted a pale green ball of water, the size of a fingernail, from Tommy's body and tossed it far away. Plant toxin, she pulled a bottle of solvent from her space ring. It was Poison Ivy's antidote for nearly all plant toxins. Tommy's toxins had already been removed, so giving him such a large bottle would be a waste. Thea gave him 2 drops, and when his breathing stabilized, she laid him down to rest. Heroes? Can anyone tell me what happened? After treating Tommy, Shadow and Laurel, who had been stranded after a long detour, returned, their faces grim. Oliver and Laurel were both older than Thea, and felt a little embarrassed. Shadow whispered a recount of their experiences. Their experience was, in fact, quite unremarkable. The journey there and back had taken 25 minutes. And the actual fighting lasted less than 3 minutes before they were counterattacked and driven back home. Is Brick Wall so formidable? Thea asked incredulously. The Brick Wall in the TV show was a complete idiot, always cocky and willing to shoot anyone he met, supposedly testing his endurance. She doubted the new Green Arrow team, with its equipment several times more powerful than the original, could defeat such a clueless creature. Brick Wall didn't fight, but he did catch my arrow with his body. The rumors about his invulnerability are probably true. However, we were mainly defeated by a sniper. He's incredibly accurate. I've never seen anyone with such skill. As captain, Oliver had to offer his opinion. He described the sniper's appearance again. Thea knew it immediately, a tall, black man with a superb shot, a high-tech infrared sight in his right eye, special body armor, and a silenced pistol mounted on his arm. Wasn't that deadshit? Why had he ended up in Star City, hanging out with Brick Wall? Amanda must be so busy, it's a miracle she hasn't made a move to catch him yet. Oliver didn't bother asking for her opinion, simply saying, I know the woman who was dealing with Brick Wall. Her codename was Porcelain, but everyone who knew her called her Chanavi. She was the leader of the Triad. Thea's mind raced before she finally remembered who she was. It wasn't her fault for her poor memory, she was a minor character, one of those people with a history of minor crimes. She checked the city surveillance system and pulled up the footage of their battle. Looking at the white-haired Asian woman, Thea curled her lips. Her skills looked mediocre. However, the trio of Brick Wall, Porcelain, and Deadshit formed a well-organized team, Brick Wall for frontal damage, Porcelain for melee damage with 2 daggers, and Deadshit for powerful ranged damage. Compared to their team composition, Team Arrow was significantly weaker. 3 of their 4 were archers, and Laurel was a minor supporting character. They were easily defeated by the enemy's counterattack. Furthermore, Green Arrow's role in the team wasn't fully realized. He lacked coordination with the others. They were clearly stronger overall, yet they were still defeated. Coordination is the most pressing issue facing Team Arrow right now. Do you need my help? Thea thought they probably didn't, but she asked anyway. Oliver didn't disappoint her, immediately waving his hand. No, we can handle it. What a joke. Green Arrow felt that if he were reduced to relying on his sister, he wouldn't be much of a hero anymore. He should just go back to Purgatory Island and fish with Yao Fei. Thea nodded silently, not getting too involved. She watched as the others dragged the newly awakened Tommy to side for a practice drill, and she continued working on her armor. To her, that brick wall was nothing but a paper wall, easily knocked down with a single kick. Judging from his genetics, this guy must have had some mutation, but his strong body came with its own side effects, a mental issue. Green Arrow could easily defeat him on his own, so there was no need for her to worry. Her good times didn't last long. Trouble befell him the next day. "Miss, you may not know me, but Boss Merlyn asked me to ask you for help," a middle-aged man with a somewhat tough demeanor said to her respectfully. "I know you. I once drank at your bar. Is Malcolm in trouble?" Thea narrowed her eyes and stared at the middle-aged man. Chapter 406 Malcolm is in trouble. The middle-aged man was Malcolm's closest associate. He owned the bar Thea had drunk at. They hadn't seen each other since she left Star City with Malcolm a few years ago. Although she didn't know his name, Thea still recognized him. "Yes, you have a good eye," the middle-aged man wiped the sweat from his forehead. His usual courage, a single blade against a dozen men, was shattered by Thea's scrutinizing gaze. He couldn't explain the reason, but she was terrified. "What's going on?" Malcolm asked, his mind wandering around the world. To be honest, Thea was a little worried about him. The world was too complex. He was nearly invincible in Star City, but he wasn't safe in the outside world. The middle-aged man didn't hesitate and told her everything he knew. "Get to the point. Do you understand?" Thea suppressed her impatience and listened for 5 minutes as he recounted Malcolm's recent experiences, how they chopped off a small-time thug's finger to get information, how they'd been chased all over the city by local gangs. The middle-aged man rambled on for ages, but he still couldn't get to the point. "The point? We didn't find anything important. It's just that the boss didn't contact me every 7 days as agreed. I realized something was wrong and came looking for you." The middle-aged man hit the nail on the head, and Thea breathed a sigh of relief. Malcolm's loyalty was unquestionable, and his abilities were truly impressive. "You know the relationship between your boss and me, right?" "Yes, your father and daughter, that makes it easy." "Do you know who Malcolm ended up contacting?" The middle-aged man thought for a moment. "I think he was looking for the leader of a fraternity." Thea was at a loss. There were so many fraternities in the United States, like the Defias Brotherhood in the game, the Brotherhood of Mutants from Marvel, some big enough to shake up the world, others just a bunch of nerdy warriors. The Haitian Brotherhood. "It's in a tavern in New York." The middle-aged man finally gave Thea a clear target. "The Haitian Brotherhood? Where's Midnight Daddy?" Thea asked, puzzled. "Miss, you're wise." "That's right," the middle-aged man complimented her flatteringly. Midnight Daddy was a renowned voodoo sorcerer in the dark world, a friend and foe of Constantine. He wasn't exactly a good guy, but he wasn't a bad guy either. He was more of a magical information broker. Thea had also spent considerable time researching contemporary magicians, including the infamous Constantine, Zatanna from the World Retrieval Show, the great wizards and alchemists of the Cold Flame Church, and, naturally, Midnight Daddy. It's true that this is the end of the Dharma Age. The glory of magic has faded, and technological gadgets have flooded the streets. The natural magic content is extremely low, and magic has been relegated to a similarly awkward position to martial arts. There's no need for accumulation, or rather, it's impossible to accumulate. Just knowing the spells is enough. Your spells aren't very powerful, and mine aren't much either. High-powered spells are readily available in books, but few possess the power to perform them. The most striking example is Constantine, who spends his days drinking, gambling, and smoking weed, never engaging in serious meditation. Yet, his spells can rival those of several great mages of the Cold Flame Church. This is partly due to his cleverness, but also partly because his opponents aren't much stronger. Xia once spied on Mr. E of the Cold Flame Church from a distance. This great magus, who prevents divination curses and never reveals his true name, works 1,000 times harder than Constantine. He skips breakfast, changes clothes, and practices tantric yoga. At noon, he practices a form of clairvoyance from the ancient Indian Shakti sect. In the evening, he practices the Taoist 3 flowers gathering at the top of the head, 5 key returning to the origin, and the great circulation of the heavens. He's mastered everything related to meditation, both ancient and modern, both Chinese and foreign. Seeing this, Xia burst into laughter. In ancient times, practicing like this would have been suicidal, even quicker than slitting one's throat with a knife. However, in modern society, magical power is so scarce that the old man achieved nothing more than blinding himself. This diligent man ultimately fell victim to Constantine, a man who didn't practice, his soul sealed within the sword, and he became a pseudo-grandfather. This demonstrates the rarity of magic in today's society. Every one of them is exhausted and injured. It's no exaggeration to say that in 100 years, magic will be consigned to storybooks, the stuff of children's whispers. This is why Thea targeted Shazam and Black Adam instead of the others. Their magic is so contaminated with impurities that absorbing their magic and then painstakingly transforming it would be far less effective than simply basking in the sun for a few days, which would yield faster growth. As for the Midnight Daddy mentioned by the middle-aged man, Thea certainly didn't take him seriously. Leng Yan and his gang at least dreamed of reviving the glory of ancient magic, but this guy, with a group of street thugs, simply staked out territory in New York's slums and collected protection money. Even if he had some hidden power, it was very limited. Facing the middle-aged man's strange gaze, Thea left Star City and headed straight for New York, searching for Midnight Dad. After a while, Thea finally located the information dealer. Midnight Dad was bare-chested, wearing a black windbreaker festooned with scraps, holding a dagger, his dark face speaking to his subordinate. A slight magical reaction revealed it was him. Thea set up a soundproof barrier in her office, casually opened a lavender portal, grabbed Midnight Dad by the collar, and, as his subordinate stared in horror, dragged him from New York to Star City. Thea's magic power had greatly increased, and her skills were much more refined than when she rescued the former Secretary of Defense. She no longer felt the same suicidal urge to teleport once. Midnight Dad was suddenly struck by a change of heart. Though his expression was utterly disfigured, he struggled to his feet, brandishing his dagger with ferocious force, anticipating the enemy's attack. Unfortunately, he danced for a long time, yet neither of the two men in the room reacted. Old Ma's loyal subordinates were stunned. What a miracle! How had this person appeared? Their worldview shattered. Thea, on the other hand, remained indifferent. She had only wanted to ask a question, but the man had overreacted, brandishing his dagger with such force that she decided to wait for him to calm down. Meanwhile, Thea couldn't help but grumble, this guy's black again. He's been around too many black people. Midnight Dad's wrists were sore from dancing, but he still didn't wait for the enemy to attack. Finally, he took a moment to survey his surroundings. The bright windows revealed a spacious office, and judging by the building outside, it was quite high up. There was a middle-aged man with dementia and a cool and beautiful career woman in the room. Midnight Dad felt a little dizzy. This environment had nothing to do with his world. Did he not take his medicine in the morning? Why did he end up here? Chapter 407 Midnight Dad. Once Midnight Dad calmed down, he quickly discovered a problem. This woman was incredibly calm. She ignored his sudden appearance, the blood-stained knife in his hand, and even his own ferocious appearance. Combining all these factors, he had to conclude that this woman had dragged him here. Simply looking at her, he could only imagine her beauty and distinguished temperament. But when he used voodoo techniques to investigate, he was shocked. Her magical power was so profound it seemed fake. In today's world, how could such a powerful spellcaster exist? Midnight Dad suspected she was using a trick. No wonder he couldn't see it, just like humans can't detect gods. Although they both wielded magic, and their combat prowess was beyond consideration, Thea's life level was already higher than these earthly spellcasters. Her divine transformation prevented any leakage of her magic power. These mortal spellcasters, judging by their energy response, looked like moving torches. Thin skin, thick flesh, a single shot to the face, that was exactly what they were. Today, Constantine despised someone picking up a ring and mocked someone else taking a cape. Deep down, he was envious, otherwise, he wouldn't have seized Shazam's power. Who are you? Tell the truth. Midnight Dad, feeling uncomfortable with Thea's animal-loving gaze, pulled a small, dried human jawbone from his jacket pocket. With gestures, he made a reptilian sound, attempting to influence Thea's will. Thea scoffed scornfully. She brainwashed everyone, hinted at everyone, never imagined someone would try to brainwash her. Look into my eyes, you demonic bastard from who knows how many generations. The guy had some demonic blood in him, but it was very weak. Not wanting to waste time, Thea asked directly, then threw it back. The eye of Horus wasn't charged with energy, but with pure emotion. His pale yellow eyes met Midnight Dad's, slightly nervous ones. The voodoo instantly lost its effect. Even a demonic hybrid couldn't withstand the intense emotional impact. No one was immune to the horror. A flood of nightmare-like scenes flooded his mind, and Midnight's willpower was rapidly crumbling. Just as Thea was about to ask, the trembling Midnight pulled a small, charred statue from his coat. He performed this seemingly simple act for a full half-minute. Thea could have stopped him, but to witness the magic of the voodoo, she held off. Midnight tried to crush the statue, but his body was shaking like a sieve, and his hands were powerless. Veins bulged on his forehead, and his huge white teeth clattered as he gritted his teeth. He held the statue tightly, using nearly all his strength to break it. A faint, blue breeze, invisible to mortals, swirled around him. Drenched in sweat, he finally emerged from the terrifying nightmare. However, the intense exhaustion left him unable to stand for a while. Excellent tactics, Thea's eyes lit up. The other man didn't neutralize her emotions, didn't he just resist them, but rather seemed to divert her emotional energy. Recalling the many similarities between voodoo and shamanism, Thea's mental shock was likely transferred to places like ancestral tombs. Others might cheat their fathers, but this guy cheated his ancestors. "What do you want from me?" Midnight Dad was completely obedient, especially after he used his ultimate trick. He found Thea sitting calmly on a high chair, her white jade fingers twirling a pen, completely unconcerned. Under normal circumstances, he would have called on his subordinates and slashed with his sword. But now, he couldn't see Thea's true depth, and since he wasn't a brave man himself, he had already made plans. Whatever it was, he would just accept the consequences. "I have a question for you. Have you seen someone named Malcolm Merlyn these days?" Thea's attitude was kind, even calm, just like when she visited the victims of the disaster in Metropolis. This attitude nearly made Midnight choke back a spit of blood. He'd thought the grudge was deep, and he'd already made up his mind to apologize. So, all he wanted was information? Teleportation and mental shock, all for such a small matter? "I have a phone in the bar, can't you just call and ask?" He felt unhappy, but he couldn't bring himself to say it. Having spent years wandering between the white and black worlds, he was well past the age of impulsiveness. He thought for a moment, it probably wasn't me who took over. "I need to go back and ask my staff." Thea was easygoing. "Okay, I'll give you half an hour to help me ask." "Thank you." While polite, her actions were anything but polite. Thea opened another portal behind him, pushing the sweating Midnight back inside. What the hell? Midnight felt countless fragments of space flash before his eyes. A tenth of a second later, he bid farewell to the spacious, white office and returned to his dark basement. The only difference was that he was sitting in a chair before, but now, limp and leaning against the wall, his body slumped. "Dad, you?" The thug who'd reported him earlier hadn't left, staring blankly at the invincible voodoo king he'd imagined, vanishing and reappearing. Had the boss finally mastered his magic? The younger brother was stunned, and Midnight Dad was also stunned. It took him a long time to realize he was back. He felt like crying, but he couldn't. This basement, filled with the smell of blood and the occasional howling of the dead, felt so familiar. Fortunately, he was a magical expert himself, so he didn't let the ridiculous assumption that the previous scene was all a dream. He thought about Malcolm Merlyn, a man he'd heard of, but had never seen. The two loudmouths woke their men and told them to investigate immediately. They wanted to know whether this man had been there, what he'd said, when, where, who, and why. Midnight Dad, an intelligence officer with a formidable memory, finally compiled his men's information, pondering the potential benefits of today's event as he sat alone in the basement, waiting. At the appointed half hour, a deep blue energy portal stood before him. This time, Thea didn't pull anyone in rudely, but instead made an inviting gesture. Midnight Dad took a deep breath and calmly walked in. He returned to the office. The middle-aged man had gone to rest, leaving Thea alone. "Dr. Quinn, the savior of Metropolis? You're not as frail as the newspapers say. You've deceived everyone and are the most powerful spellcaster I've ever met." Midnight Dad was in the intelligence business. With Thea appearing daily in newspapers, magazines, and other media outlets, few people really knew her. It was just that Midnight Dad hadn't connected the two before. They were completely different people. Congressman and president, that was too far removed from his world. Chapter 408 Target, Cold Flame Church. The barrage of attacks stunned him. He wouldn't even recognize Thea, let alone the president, standing before him. But half an hour allowed him to calm down. The truth was a bit horrifying, but Thea was indeed someone he'd seen frequently in newspapers and on television. He flipped through a few newspapers, finding nothing about her intelligence, determination, composure, and calmness, but not a single mention of her possessing supernatural abilities. Midnight Dad was so enraged that he burned the newspapers in his palms. They were all liars. The people in the newspapers were liars, the people writing them were liars, and the most infuriating thing was that he'd believed them all along. However, knowing Thea's true identity wouldn't help him in his current situation. A Haitian illegal immigrant couldn't possibly call the police to arrest a billionaire with immense influence in politics, business, and the military. His ultimate fate would be a bloody battle with the New York police in the streets, a fight that would last until dawn. After much deliberation, he reluctantly stepped through the portal and became an honest intelligence reporter. But before he spoke, he revealed Thea's identity, hoping to mitigate his disadvantage. Thea, on the other hand, remained indifferent. Many knew her identity, and it would only grow in number. She didn't expect to keep it a secret forever. With no residence permit, birth certificate, or payment history, it was impossible for Midnight Dad to report her to the media. The barriers between the ordinary people and the magical world were artificially high, so there was nothing to worry about. Finding his words hadn't caused any emotional distress in Thea, Midnight Dad completely stopped casting curses and honestly recounted what he knew. The compass of Croydon. Thea crossed her arms, pondering the information Midnight Dad had given her. The voodoo sorcerer, unsure of Thea's knowledge of this magical item, quietly explained, the compass belonged to an old bastard named Angus Croydon from the 1930s. He was a scumbag who died in the sewers. But rumor has it his compass could locate any magical item in the world, and most importantly, it could be used by ordinary people. Midnight Dad spilled the beans on everything he knew, and Thea felt the item was a bit overhyped. If it were as miraculous as the description suggested, it wouldn't be something a dead-on wizard could craft. You mean Malcolm Merlyn was looking for this compass? And then he disappeared. Yes, my intelligence only placed it in Norway. After the deal was done, he left New York. Midnight Dad tried to sound assertive, but he didn't have the confidence to do so, and ended up being a bit humble. This old man, Malcolm, just couldn't sit still. Thea had initially tricked him into searching for his roots simply to avoid a conflict with the Green Arrow. Surprisingly, he had a talent for detective work, forcing his way from the mortal world to the magical realm based on a patchwork of clues. Unsurprisingly, he'd been trapped in a small area. Thea hadn't sensed the loss of her bloodline, and with Malcolm's resourcefulness and agility, they seemed safe for now, but the long-term future was uncertain. The local tyrant in the European magical world was the Order of the Cold Flame. It was a small sect founded decades ago by 4 great wizards, but its teachings have become increasingly distorted, taking on a cult-like quality. The 4 founders were M.R.E., whom Thea had once observed remotely, practicing 18 meditation techniques daily until he blinded himself. Zatanna Zatara's biological father, the great wizard Giovanni Zatara, was rumored to be a direct descendant of Leonardo da Vinci, but the old man had been dead for years. Zatanna now toured the world performing magic shows. The remaining 2 were Archmage Sargon and Master Alchemist Hanorak. Unlike Father Midnight, these 2 were veterans with decades of experience in magic. While Thea could spy remotely, creating a portal and dragging someone out, as she had done with Midnight, was a challenge. Voodoo was stronger than magic in terms of its occult, but defense had always been their weaker point. Father Midnight was completely irritated by Thea, not because he was weak, but because she was stronger. Ultimately, magic is a systematic discipline, and knowledge of attacking arrays and defensive wards is essential. Capturing someone from a heavily guarded lair, shrouded in countless defensive wards, would be even more difficult than simply storming it. After opening a portal for Father Midnight, Thea remained silent, her message clear: it was nothing to do with you, so you can rest in peace. Midnight paused for a few seconds, pondering. Excuse me, where are you planning to find someone next? Switzerland, at the Cold Flame Church headquarters, Thea said calmly, as if she were visiting a neighbor's house rather than a cult's lair. Midnight Dad felt incredibly clever. From Thea's tone, he knew she had nothing to do with Ling Yan. Furthermore, her aggressive questioning of him, such an unconventional approach, made a 5 to 90% chance. Can I come with you? You might not know this, But Ling Yan's current doctrine is to eradicate all magic users and collect all magical equipment. Thea sized Midnight Dad up and down. This information dealer possessed abundant magical power, only slightly inferior to Mr. Ease and his men. According to Thea's own analogy, it was slightly lower than her own level before she absorbed the amulet of Isis. Although he had practiced for years, in ancient times when magic was abundant, his magical power was equivalent to that of an average mage meditating for 10 years. His only drawback was the abundance of impurities in his magical power. Each use of this power taxed the body, and over time, it wasn't uncommon for him to die mid-training. This manifested itself in his lack of stamina in combat. He needed to rest after unleashing 2 powerful attacks, and without rest, the surging magical energy within him could cause him to pass out from the pain. Midnight Dad waited anxiously for a response, but to his surprise, Thea changed the subject and asked him another question. Will you be my subordinate? Your body is full of hidden dangers. I can help you, even take you further. Thea felt that this guy was a monocyte after all, and with Deathstroke, it wouldn't be too difficult for the two of them to control the Dark World's intelligence network. Similar to how she dealt with Deathstroke, she threw out a replica yellow ring, which Midnight Dad instinctively caught. I'll be leading a team to Switzerland in 2 days. You might consider wearing it. You can communicate with me. Of course, if you refuse, the ring will fly directly back to me, Thea said, and with a magical hand, she threw him into the portal. 2 days? Sitting alone in the basement, Midnight Dad quietly looked at the ring in his hand. Needless to say, this ring was not easy to wear. Witchcraft has many ways to control others. Putting himself in her shoes, he felt that the price would be high. His desire for power and his cherished life made him extremely hesitant. Should he ignore Thea and continue living, or take a chance? Midnight Daddy didn't make up his mind until dawn. Chapter 409, Getting Ready to Depart. After sending her guests off, Thea immediately summoned Deathstroke and Poison Ivy, sending them with 300 mercenaries to the Cold Flame Church's headquarters deep in the Swiss Alps. Contacts with the AOSC became increasingly frequent, and a vast array of advanced technology was secretly withdrawn under the guise of the committee. Indeed, Thea, ever cautious, had 2 options. The chances of them being reasonable and answering every question were slim to none. All that remained was to defeat them. If they harbored resentment, they would be annihilated. A group of cultists, by any measure, offered no assistance to the future Earth crisis. If their magic was limited and their attacks were weak, they would be crushed. If their magic was strange and secretive, they would be forced to use advanced technology. Near the end of her shift, her assistant informed her, "A gentleman named Barry Allen wants to see you." Unaware that Oliver and Barry had discussed their personal affairs, Thea was simply surprised by his sudden appearance. Let him in. 3 minutes later, the somewhat familiar Barry Allen greeted Thea. He was truly charming. It wasn't his looks that were appealing, but rather his exceptional demeanor. Thea had met many superheroes, but Barry's demeanor was that of a sunny, cheerful young man. Unlike the sunny Superman possessed a radiant aura. In Luther's words, he was like a god walking among men. You wouldn't expect him to engage in mundane activities like eating, sleeping, chatting, and gossiping. All you could sense was his heart's capacity for all things. Barry was far more affable than Superman himself. After a few casual conversations, the two of them bonded. I heard from Ollie that you're in charge of the alien project. Is that true? Do aliens really exist? Feeling that the small talk was almost over, Barry finally got to the point. Thea was a bit surprised. She hadn't expected him to set his sights on aliens. What if he got carried away and piloted an alien spaceship into space to find his mother's murderer? Would this timeline still be viable? He had to be dissuaded. Thea didn't want to face the reverse flash in hundreds of time gaps. Thea turned her office computer 180 degrees. These are the 7 alien races that have landed on Earth. I can't tell you where they're located. We've compiled a rough breakdown of their body composition, blood concentration, and lifestyle habits. I can show you. Barry Allen took the computer and, without even bothering to thank him, began to peruse it. While not as knowledgeable as Batman or Luther, he was well informed, and the data looked easy enough to him. The more he looked, the more he frowned. Barry felt these aliens were weak. Judging from the data, some had even less explosive power than Earthlings. This was a stark contrast to the unpredictable, elusive, and powerful aliens he'd imagined before arriving. Dr. Quinn, Do you think there might be some kind of alien that transcends the constraints of the body and moves around like lightning? Thea waved her hand nonchalantly. You and my brother are friends, just call me Thea. As for your question, I can only say it's impossible. The body is fundamental. No matter how tiny a creature is, even a microorganism, it has a physical form. We live in a material world. This is the conclusion reached by countless generations of scientists. Please do not desecrate it. Barry, a fellow scientific researcher, looked at Thea's serious expression with awe. This was the true demeanor of a scholar, and for a moment, he felt that he was being a bit too picky. In fact, Thea secretly criticized herself, a magic user, pretending to be a scientist, talking about the power of modern science. She was also helpless. The speed force itself defied the laws of physics. Not only herself, but even Newton couldn't explain it clearly. As for the lightning you mentioned, it defies the laws of physics. Lightning fast is just an adjective we use. That speed is too fast for air friction alone to handle. Therefore, the situation you describe isn't caused by aliens. You have to be confident. Aliens are not stronger than us. None of the aliens on Earth right now would survive without our help. Don't believe those movie nonsense. You subconsciously place aliens in a powerful position. That's not right. To dissuade Barry Allen from his thoughts, Thea denigrated the aliens. She described those hundreds of thousands of aliens as no different from Syrian refugees. They could be fed when they were happy, and kicked when they were unhappy. Barry was a little confused. Were aliens so mean? Although kind, he was still proud of being an Earthling. Hearing Thea's extolling of Earthling invincibility didn't resonate with him. Feeling his doubts were resolved, he took his leave. After impersonating a Scientologist for a while and conning Barry Allen away, Thea turned to other matters. The European trip wasn't sure how long it would take, but she could handle the committee's business any time. The heroes of Star City still needed some preparation. Each of them received a portable energy defense ring, capable of withstanding a full M4A1 magazine or 3 grenade rounds. Tommy, having returned from poisoning, had learned his lesson. Although he didn't understand the source of the divine blood and genetic enhancement fluid, he dutifully began the injections. Fearing they would be seriously injured and unable to be treated in time, she also prepared a healing arrow for each of them. The barrel was rich in nutrients and a small amount of adrenaline. Poisoned or seriously injured, a single injection wouldn't guarantee recovery, but at least they could escape on their own. 2 days later, Thea activated the advanced invisibility spell on Merlyn's sword and traveled alone to Switzerland, where she reunited with Deathstroke and the others. Midnight Dad finally succumbed to the allure of power and donned a replica lantern ring. The emotional energy helped him purge excess magical impurities from his body. While the total amount seemed to have decreased by a third, his magical power became more flexible and versatile, allowing him to perform many previously skillful sorcery spells. His power had arguably increased significantly. Not bad. How are our people preparing? Thea glanced at Midnight Father, nodded in approval, and turned back to ask Deathstroke. Killing and setting fire to other people's homes was what Deathstroke was best at? After years of mercenary service, he had heard a bit about the Cold Flame Church. In his opinion, these magic tricks were just so-so, not to mention that he was bringing elite soldiers and world-class weapons. Wearing a red and black mask, Deathstroke's expression could not be seen, but his voice was filled with murderous intent. Everything is ready and we can leave at any time. Okay, let's go. Remember, we're here to ask questions. So please be polite. Thea pulled Poison Ivy and Midnight Father into invisibility, and said cheerfully as she looked at the more than 300 soldiers armed to the teeth outside the tent, 5 suits of mechanical exoskeleton armor, and 2 M270 multiple rocket launchers. Chapter 410 Iony Magic. Several of Thea's men were skeptical of Lady Thea's so-called propriety. Deathstroke scoffed, Poison Ivy chuckled, and Midnight, reflecting on his own predicament, stood with his hands behind his back, gloating over the distant valley. Under the cover of night, the group moved in complete silence. The multiple rocket launchers remained at the camp, their range more than enough to reach the cultists. Thea didn't want the ordinary mercenaries to know of their presence, leaving Deathstroke in command. She had previously explained that the mission was to eliminate the cultists, and the mercenaries weren't averse to the task. They would kill both good and bad, and anything was fine for a fee. The members of the Cold Flame Church might be skilled in magic, but they were no strangers to building a stronghold. Furthermore, they were used to being arrogant, and only they caused trouble, never others. The group remained vigilant, but there wasn't even a patrol or watchman. The enemy occupied an ancient medieval castle, entirely built of brick and stone, with heavy wooden doors that lent a historic feel. At least Thea felt it was more than enough for a film like Underworld. "Go knock on the door." Deathstroke finally remembered the young lady's instructions to observe etiquette, his voice deep as he pointed at one of his men. The man was puzzled. In a situation like this, wouldn't we just throw a barrage of grenades and kick down the door? Now, fully armed, we were supposed to knock? Though baffled, the man dared not disobey Deathstroke's orders. Awkwardly, he went up and rapped on the castle's wooden door. Thea almost laughed as she watched her men nervously aim their rifles at the gate. It would have been even more heartwarming if someone inside had shouted, "Who's there?" and someone outside had said, "Send us your warmth." Unfortunately, the mercenaries looked as if they were dead. After 2 minutes of rapping, no one uttered a word. While others couldn't see Thea, the mercenaries with their imitation lantern rings could still see her. Deathstroke gave the young lady a look. What should they do next? Launch our Italian cannons? No, our M270 multiple rocket launchers. First, 2 rounds, Thea said from her lantern ring. Several people stared at her blankly. Is this what you call etiquette? Deathstroke nodded silently. Fear wasn't in his vocabulary. He signaled his men to move away before pulling out his intercom and ordering the M270s behind him to fire 2 rounds to blast the gate open. With 2 whooshes, 2 M26A1 extended range rockets, trailing red flames, struck the wooden door. Just 2 centimeters from the door, a flash of metallic copper light ignited, signaling the rockets were intercepted. The violent explosion made the copper light flicker violently. When the smoke cleared, the gate was completely intact, as if the 2 rockets had never been there. The magical defenses here are quite clever. Thea's interest peaked. Knocking on the door wasn't affected, but when the energy reached a certain level, the defensive magic activated. The original designer must have been a genius. But it was impossible to stop Thea with just these 2 attacks. See? The metallic sheen on the door has dimmed considerably. Keep attacking, Thea ordered Deathstroke. The M270 carried 12 rockets. Deathstroke continued to order the rear to fire. Meanwhile, mercenaries armed with anti-tank missiles were ordered to fire freely. Not confined to the main gate. The enemy's defensive barrier was a single entity, allowing them to strike anywhere. Suddenly, a barrage of rockets, missiles, grenades, and incendiary bombs blazed down. The Cold Flame Church's protective barrier was truly remarkable, even a masterpiece of art. However, the masters focused their attention on the caster, ignoring the finest achievements of human technology. If Thea were to attack their barrier on her own, it would take a tremendous amount of time to identify the magic circles, analyze them, and decipher them. Even with the Eye of Horus, it would take her half a day to crack the barrier. But with a large force, she didn't need to bother. Those missiles and rockets cost only a few $100,000, while her research on power armor could cost millions a day. This amount was nothing. The culmination of human magic, the final technological gem, a barrier so perfect it was nearly impenetrable, was finally breached by a horde of soldiers. The heavy wooden door was shattered by the explosion. Deathstroke, grenade launcher in left hand, long sword in right, stepped in first. They walked down a short corridor and arrived at the vestibule. Night cast a shadow over the area, the low trees rustling in the breeze, and the dim light cast a murderous aura. The faint cries of battle could be heard from within the building. What was going on? Everyone looked at each other in confusion. We had just entered, and were there another group of enthusiastic visitors inside? Regardless of whether there was a fight or a dance going on, it had nothing to do with Thea. She was simply here to gather information. She gestured for everyone to continue inside. With a crackling sound, the floor in the center of the vestibule rapidly flipped up. A mechanism twisted, and a full-length, white jade statue of a middle-aged man, carved from a man's body, slowly rose. The statue wore a top hat and a suit, holding a cane in its left hand, its right arm stretched out at shoulder level, fingers spread out, facing the crowd from afar. Asufer, refuse, the word reversed. The statue's voice seemed to come from somewhere underground, hollow and weak. Although the sound was weak, the effect was surprisingly good. Many mercenaries retreated more than 10 steps, and some even walked to the door in one breath. The originally neat formation suddenly became chaotic. Deathstroke and Midnight each took a step back, one relying on willpower, the other on magic power. Unknown vines emerged from under Poison Ivy's feet, firmly grasping her ankles, and she did not retreat a single step. Thea also felt the unknown energy influencing her judgment, but now her magic power and willpower had reached an extremely high level, and she was able to get rid of the magic's influence with just a little effort. Irony magic. Thea couldn't help but look at the statue. Surely, this must be Zatanna's father. Somehow, he'd managed to imbue the statue with a wisp of his own mental energy and a small amount of magic, using it to ward off all non-Catholic members. This spell was truly ingenious. Magic, in its origins, was the power of language. The irony, father and daughter, had taken the subject to its extremes, then ingeniously reinterpreted it. Using magic to transform the impossible, the illusion into reality, it was a magical equivalent of a small effort to achieve a great result. A genius born 1,000 years too late, Thea sighed. This guy lived in the Middle Ages, a time when nature was still rife with magic, and his achievements weren't necessarily inferior to Merlyn's. She wondered if Zatanna's father had invented irony himself. She only remembered Constantine and the Nightmare Nurse using a few phrases, so judging by that, it wasn't bloodline magic. The church should have the old man's notes, right? After she finished her inquiries, should she ask for them? Chapter 411, The Cold Flame Church's Civil War. We could learn from them later. Being driven back by a statue wasn't exactly a glorious thing. Some mercenaries suggested a detour, scaling the side wall. Deathstroke shook his head and rejected the suggestion. He had no sense of honor, so he was indifferent. But Thea didn't think she could be forced back by the statue. She spoke to Deathstroke through her ring. After the group had moved away, Deathstroke instructed the mercenaries to approach one by one to test the statue's power. Bullets were useless, so she simply refused. Running faster or walking slower proved futile. They were all driven back without exception. She tried to drain the statue's magic power, but Thea discovered it had anticipated this. A magic circle at its base continuously drew magic from the earth. To drain it completely, she would have to flatten at least half the valley. Interesting. Thea stepped forward out of sight of the soldiers. Irony was indeed powerful, but its repetitive rejection was rather rigid. While Thea's understanding of magic wasn't as good as Zatanna's father's, her methods were far more complex. Material energy can be rejected, magic can be rejected, but how can emotions be rejected? Fear. A large amount of emotional energy shot out from Xia's eyes. She not only wanted to destroy the statue, but also wanted to observe its inner workings and use this opportunity to peek into the mystery of irony magic. The guardian of the planet OA couldn't reject fear, the gods couldn't reject it, and as mortals, it was even less likely to reject it. The ground where the statue stood shook slightly, and tiny cracks spread all over its body. The statue's outstretched right hand directly broke 3 fingers, but it was extremely reluctant to withstand Xia's first wave of emotional impact. Was it because the statue itself was not a living being? Xia understood a little, but so what? The emotion of fear permeates all matter. Stone may not feel fear, but the trace of spirit left by the great magician can feel it. No one can reject fear. A second wave, a mixture of Thea's magic and fear, instantly crushed the statue's feeble resistance. The jade sculpture's right hand shattered, its remaining spiritual power sapped by the overwhelming emotional impact. The statue's invisible aura vanished instantly, and the jade seemed stained with a faint layer of ink. The cracks widened, eventually reducing it to a pile of debris. The destruction was swift. Thea had barely seen a third of it before the statue shattered on its own. Needless to say, it must have been a backup plan left by the old man. When the smoke and dust cleared, Thea covered her nose, feeling somewhat depressed as she walked inside. The mercenaries hadn't seen the invisible clash, they only felt the statue inexplicably explode. Amidst the bell's rebuke, they regrouped and rushed into the courtyard. The courtyard was considerably wider than the front courtyard, its pavement meticulously paved. It was clear that the castle's previous owner had used it as a martial arts training ground. Nearby stood several archery targets and straw men for training. But now that these things had been removed, all that was left was 100 cultists, bare-armed and wearing red robes, their faces and bodies covered in tattoos, hacking and slashing at each other. Thea had initially assumed these cultists were incredibly diligent, staying up late to practice martial arts to master their craft, but after 3 seconds, she knew she was mistaken. Over a dozen were already sprawled on the ground, and more were constantly joining them, leaving their bodies to rest. 4 figures in the crowd stood out, A brown-skinned woman with a nose ring, attacking a bearded old man. Another, thin as a stick, weighed less than 100 pounds, his shirt open, wielding a glowing red sword as he slashed at Mr. E, whose eyes had been blinded by excessive practice. It was easy to tell that the woman and the thin man were in the same group, and the old man and Mr. E were in the same group. However, Thea had seen photos of those three people before. Besides Zatanna's deceased father, they were the three remaining founders. But where did this woman with the nose ring come from? Did you release the seductive pheromone? Thea and her group of more than 300 people entered the art and found that the group was fighting fiercely and no one paid any attention to them. They asked Poison Ivy with some confusion. I don't even know them. How could I have done it? Poison Ivy rolled her eyes. That's strange. Thea couldn't figure out what they were doing. In line with the principle of less trouble is more trouble, she thought she would just wait until they were done fighting and then ask them herself. More than 300 people were ready to watch the show quietly. The plan was very good, but unfortunately, although the other side was a cultist with dementia, they were not blind. People who were wielding machetes could not help but be attracted to them. In fact, how could they not be discovered? They walked in with a swagger. In order to ensure that the assault force was sufficient, there were also 5 mercenaries who had undergone genetic clinical trials before. They specially put on the new exoskeleton armor developed by the committee. Excluding Thea, Batman, and Luthor, the slicker ones, this was the latest equipment independently developed by human scientists, incorporating alien technology. The exoskeleton suits featured few other enhancements, save for a Vulcan cannon mounted on each hand, with ammunition sufficient for 10 minutes of full fire. The committee had built 10 sets, but Thea, under the guise of testing their performance, had taken 5 to the cult's lair. The 5 exoskeletons were incredibly heavy, making a thumping sound as they walked on the ground. The numerous torches in the atrium reflected off the jet-black metal structures, making them even more breathtaking. The cultists gradually quieted down, standing distinctly to either side. Those who weren't thinking clearly stood in front, gritting their teeth, while those with a modicum of intelligence retreated behind the human wall. The 4 individuals at the center of the conflict were relatively sober. They exchanged glances, their eyes gazing with a single meaning. Are these reinforcements you've summoned? However, they were bewildered by the confusion in their eyes. An old man, with a long beard and a white turban, dressed in Indian attire, was gravely wounded. His eyes, gleaming purple, flickered as he sought a chance to escape. Blind Mr. E, however, had a better understanding of the situation, for his clairvoyance allowed him to see Thea and the other 2 in their advanced invisibility. He was a little intimidated by Midnight Dad's inky black magic, but he felt he could defeat him with a little effort. Poison Ivy, in his clairvoyance, was a ball of luminous green energy, devoid of internal circulation and blood flow. Was she a human? Was she some kind of summoned creature? Such a bizarre life form left him unsure. As for Thea, standing in the center, he saw her as a living source of magical energy, a bottomless well. She appeared calm on the surface, but when she raged, no one could withstand her. Such overwhelming power left Mr. E at a loss. Although he could feel Thea's breathing and heartbeat, he felt she didn't look human. Could she be an angel from the higher realms? Blind old Mr. E automatically took the last stand, ready to let a few of his former companions test the group's strength. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 412 What to do if the negotiation fails? Fight. They both retreated, each for their own reasons. The woman with the nose ring, who felt they should lead the cult, and the lanky man exchanged glances. The lanky man, unperturbed, stepped back, motioning for the woman with the nose ring to approach and question them. What are you doing? The woman, unfazed by the fear of the old man, bravely stepped forward and sternly addressed the seemingly leader, Deathstroke. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Thea took a look. This guy was a total non-mainstream figure. His skin was rough as sandpaper, his nose and eyebrow piercings were pierced, and he wore even more shiny accessories that jingled as he walked. His clothes, tattered and tattered, were either torn in a fight or simply natural. His brown skin gleamed in the firelight, a fierce and menacing aura. We're here to inquire about someone named. Deathstroke was interrupted before the woman with the nose ring finished. You're looking for someone here? Haha, she laughed heartily, and the cultists around her who supported her also broke into laughter. There are only dead men here. The woman with the nose ring felt no trace of magic from Deathstroke. He was like an ant to her, and she taunted him recklessly. Deathstroke had been on the battlefield for years, and had seen all sorts of strange people. He wasn't angry, but glanced at Thea. What should he do next? Thea was furious. This guy looked like a hippopotamus, was weak, and so unconventional. No doubt, beat him. A continuous roar of bang-bang echoed as 5 exoskeletons and 10 Vulcan cannons opened fire simultaneously, their metal bullets slashing down on the opposing enemies with a density denser than raindrops. The woman felt a chill run up her spine. With a wave of her hand, a puff of smoke appeared behind her. The mercenaries, believing her to be the leader, were worried that Deathstroke might take him alive, so they didn't focus their fire on her. Plus, she was a fast runner, so the woman with the nose ring saved her life at the cost of losing an ear. Her magic had saved her, but those brainwashed heretics had no such ability. Using their flesh and blood to resist the storm of metal resulted in over 40 of them being cut down, leaving limbs and broken arms everywhere. A few, too, had the temerity to hide behind the bodies of their companions, but they were all torn to pieces. Kill these heretics. Cold flames burn, spare none. The tall, lanky figure was terrified, his sword raised high, but he didn't move a step. Attack. Deathstroke also gave the order. The roar of various guns echoed over the ancient castle, shrouded in evil. The mercenaries imagined one-sided battle hadn't materialized. The cultists had put aside their quarrels and stood together in groups of 3 or 4. Cold flames burn, cold flames protect me. Their chants melted the bodies of dozens of supposedly devout believers like candles, their eyes, ears, mouths, and noses emitting plumes of green smoke that gathered into a ball in the air. A swarm of abstract, white mist monsters, large and small, appeared before the mercenaries, leaving behind a trail of burned heretic skeletons. Looks like some kind of ethereal monster formed by burning human souls. It looks scary, but it's nothing serious. Use the quantum cage, Thea instructed. Deathstroke gestured behind him, and 3 mercenaries, armed with slender guns, fired 2 shots into their sides, while the remaining one fired 5 meters in front of him. Then suddenly pressed the button. The 3 points formed an equilateral triangle, and the area lit up with a brilliant blue electric light. This was one of the Sky Eye's advanced technologies. The electric light contained a weak nano-decomposition beam, originally developed to mimic Superman's heat ray, but its actual effectiveness was poor. The Sky Eye used this device to switch from offense to defense. It was useless against Superman, but against ordinary psychics, it was a deadly weapon. These smoke monsters could remain in the subspace, but only for a short time. Once they entered the material world, the nano-decomposition beams would shred them into microscopic particles. The smoke monsters let out a silent cry. Damaged bodies forced them to retreat into the warp to rest, only to be damaged again upon emerging. This cycle continued endlessly, until several smoke monsters, exhausted from energy, were vaporized. The remaining larger ones chose to fuse, forming a 3-headed, 6-legged behemoth, attempting to break free from the quantum cage. Mercenaries armed with guns engaged the remaining cultists, who were armed with machetes. The members of the Cold Flame Church would not stand by and watch. The tall, lanky figure holding a longsword was none other than the Grand Alchemist Hanorrak. He pulled a golden stone from his trouser pocket and threw it at a corner of the quantum cage. Countless powerful acids corroded the area, vaporizing one of the triangulators. Without a stable power source, the quantum cage flickered twice, and the azure electric light dissipated unwillingly into the air. Government running dogs. Use whatever tricks you have, Hanorrak shouted. It's no wonder he admitted his mistake. Deathstroke had equipped his men with high-quality equipment. Over 300 of them were fully armed with cutting-edge technology, including exoskeletons. It was clearly beyond the capabilities of ordinary forces. Combining all these assumptions, the idea that the enemy was a government agency out to capture them and slice them up automatically popped up. Despite his loud shouts, he remained motionless, his feet firmly planted in place, his hands assembling a large array of items, ready for defense. Are you going to meet him? Thea turned to Midnight. Midnight was a shrewd man. While Thea was seeking his opinion, he knew full well that this request couldn't be refused. He also wanted to see how much he had improved. He nodded slightly, indicating his willingness to fight. He was a clever man. Suggestion wasn't very effective against those with magical powers. Thea had noticed from their initial encounter that if Midnight didn't obey, she would have to resort to other spells to control him. With a flick of her finger, she cancelled Midnight's invisibility, and the Voodoo King, also covered in bits and pieces, walked out of the group. Midnight? You sewer maggot. How dare you bring your men to the Cold Flame Church to wreak havoc? They didn't recognize the mercenaries, but old Midnight was practically on their level, so they knew him. The nose-ringed woman and Tanorak cursed, wondering if they'd pushed him too far. Was he simply acting as a guide, leading the army? Old Midnight wasn't a pushover. Initially, with the four of them and him alone, he couldn't even defeat them in a one-on-one fight, so he just had to endure it. But things were different now. He figured Thea could take on at least 3, and he could handle 1. Add to that the unknown makeup of poison ivy, and his odds were stacked high. There was no need to grovel. He reached into his arms and pulled out a pristine white human skull. You wanted my skull of the dead? I've got it for you. He spat blood onto the skull, and it seemed to come alive, its jaws crackling as it blew a foul, black wind at the men. Chapter 413, The Great Mage Sargon. Tanorak glanced back with a hint of frustration at the Archmage Sargon, lying on the ground, feigning death. He was expert at dealing with voodoo sorcerers, but unfortunately, he and his daughter had teamed up to ambush him, leaving the two sides in a state of deep discord. Mr. Ezila's face glared at him with a half-smile. It seemed he had no choice but to take on the challenge himself. An alchemist versus a voodoo sorcerer was a somewhat bizarre battle format, but Tanorak, despite his disdain for Midnight, nonetheless charged forward. How could a lowly street thug dare to run rampant in the Cold Flame Church? The Archmage, with a single glance, determined the composition of the poisonous gas. He flung out 2 bottles of solvent, one clear, the other cloudy. The two blended in the air, creating a gas with a refreshing aroma, instantly neutralizing Midnight's poisonous spray. Midnight, undeterred, produced a palm-sized, dark brown skeleton and, muttering a spell, caused it to swell in the wind. However, its skeletal structure didn't resemble that of a modern human. So short, is this a human skeleton? Deathstroke asked Thea, perplexed, as he gazed at the skeleton tossed by his new companion. This creature stood less than a meter tall. Could it have been a dwarf in life? That's probably the skeleton of a Lemurian, a civilization that predates Atlantis. For modern Earthlings, it's prehistoric. Thea was intrigued. She hadn't expected Midnight to possess such a treasure. The Lemurians were divided into giants and dwarfs, and this skeleton was undoubtedly a dwarf, a natural psychic. However, supernatural powers are directly tied to bloodline. Having been dead for hundreds of thousands of years, it's no easy task to maximize the meager value of this shattering corpse. Midnight had already considered this question. He had given the skeleton a small tambourine. The dark brown skeleton slowly struck it, sending intermittent, invisible psychic shocks radiating outward in a cone. The Grand Alchemist's willpower wasn't high, and he was sent retreating repeatedly by the psychic shock. At the crucial moment, Mystery, who practiced 18 meditations a day, stepped forward, his hands radiating waves as he took on Midnight Daddy. As for whether he intended to leave the unfathomable Thea and Poison Ivy to his companions, no one knew. The Grand Alchemist, indignant at being tricked by the voodoo sorcerer he despised, abandoned his trap and slammed the ground. With a rumbling of heavy objects, 2 heavy iron golems darted out of the backyard, their massive bodies quickly appearing before the men. Kill them, the Grand Alchemist said, pointing at the mercenaries. Thea was a bit surprised. These earth spellcasters did have some valuables, Midnight's prehistoric skeletons and this fellow's iron golems. These were all extremely valuable. It would be a shame to have them blown up by a barrage of missiles and firebombs. Thea winked at Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy's eyes instantly turned emerald green. Vines suddenly erupted from the feet of the iron golem, which had been marching heavily towards the group. Influenced by Poison Ivy's chlorophyll, the vines grew at an incredible rate. In less than 10 seconds, the vines, which had only been able to bind, slowed the golem's pace. The golem, with immense strength, charged forward tirelessly. Vines as thick as a child's arm were torn apart by the immense force. One ripped, only to be entangled by 2 more in the blink of an eye. 2 more ripped, only to be entangled by 5 or 6 more. Less than 30 seconds had passed as the 2 iron golems struggled mightily, but the massive vines entangled them, making them unable to move forward. Seeing this, Mr. E winced. pulling the battle between him and Midnight Father further to the side. The Grand Alchemist, sensing something was amiss, pulled a handful of powder from his pocket and threw it towards Poison Ivy and Thea. "Come out, you scumbag!" The powder was clearly very dispersed, but it defied the laws of physics. He flung it dozens of meters away, finally dispersing 5 meters in front of Thea. With a wave of his hand, Poison Ivy erected a green wall composed entirely of plants from the crack in the ground, blocking the powder completely. "Play with him." Thea, dressed in a black robe that covered her from head to toe, reached out and removed the two men's invisibility. With the exception of Mystery, who had already noticed, the other three took a deep breath. Poison Ivy sat on a massive, vibrant, piranha plant. Judging by its size, it stood 3 meters tall, and with its branches and roots fully extended, it was at least 10 meters. Could there be such a large plant on Earth? Faced with a formidable foreign enemy, the Sargans, who had temporarily reconciled themselves, looked at the Grand Alchemist, whose knowledge was the most diverse and profound. Grand Alchemist Tanorak shook his head. This thing didn't seem to grow naturally. They, the mages, often summoned unusual creatures. A giant plant wasn't surprising. They were somewhat bewildered by the fact that they couldn't discern Poison Ivy's true nature. Was she alive or dead? If alive, her internal circulation was distinct from that of a human. If dead, she could breathe, and instead of a dead aura, she exuded a dazzling aura of life. Like Mr. E before her, the three men believed Poison Ivy to be some kind of summoned being from some otherworldly realm. As for the summoner, who else could it be? It was naturally Miss Thea, dressed like a necromancer beside her. Poison Ivy exuded vitality, but lacked magical power, which the others merely feared. But Thea, they were stunned by her immense magical power. The nose-ringed woman, a recent learner of magic, and Tanorak, who had been deeply immersed in alchemy and had accumulated little magical power, simply found it awe-inspiring. Besides Thea, the most powerful archmage present, Sargon, felt it far more profoundly. Pure, profound, and vast were not enough to describe this magical power. Confused about its origins, Sargon, curious, used his mystical techniques to glimpse Thea's inner essence. He was the oldest, had seen and experienced so much, that even an angel descended from earth wouldn't have surprised him. But the scene he'd imagined didn't occur at all. He seemed to stand alone in the void, pitch black everywhere. He looked down, and as his gaze descended, the void grew darker, until it absorbed his gaze. He could no longer see anything. Only his years of cultivation told him, "You're looking into the abyss, and the abyss is looking back at you. If you still want to see tomorrow's sunrise, you'd better get out." He didn't know it was Thea's psychic shield, a weapon she'd learned from the Martian manhunter. A yellow energy of fear enveloped his mind. He'd been attacked by his daughter and betrayed by his best friend. And his willpower had been reduced to ash. Observing Thea's magical reactions from a distance wouldn't have been a problem, but his desperate attempt to see intrinsic matter resulted in a collision with the psychic shield and a modified version of the psychic maze. All kinds of hallucinations appeared one after another: the spellcaster he tortured to death, the demons of hell, the monsters of the abyss, the nightmares in the space layer, and countless species that he had seen or had not seen appeared around him. His mental strength was exhausted until it was exhausted, and his eyes were filled with endless emptiness. He could no longer perceive any information from the outside world. Chapter 414 Gem Magic. Immersed in Thea's mind, this great wizard, a force comparable to Zatanna's father, lost all his mental energy. His mind sank into a deep, drowsy state. His breathing grew increasingly shallow, and finally, he stretched his legs, twisted his neck, and with a strange smile, he died. Holy crap, the two men who had known him for half their lives, along with his daughter, were stunned. You're dead just because of a disagreement? Have you considered that we're still fighting? Are you kidding us? Is there still hope for Team 7's unity? Where's your collective spirit? They'd be even more horrified if they knew their powerful partner had perished simply because he glanced at someone in the crowd. Mystery, who had been battling Mr. Midnight, was knocked back, only to have to unleash two of his ultimate spells to claw his way back into the game. Old man. Give me your magic. Old man, say something. Come on, hit me. The woman with the nose ring frantically shook his father's body back and forth, as if that would release some magic. Sadly, death extinguishes the flames. Sargon's magical energy, like a prisoner freed from its shackles, dissipated in all directions. Ah, the woman with the nose ring could see this, and like a wounded animal, she roared to the heavens. Stop yelling. Follow me and resist. Tanorak was frantic. What a bunch of idiots he had on his side. His strongest mage had died for no apparent reason, and now it was down to a supporting player like him to shoulder the brunt of the situation, a burden so profound it seemed impossible to imagine. The situation was dire. Though the woman with the nose ring was new, she thought she could offer some help. He stared at Thea nervously. Deathstroke and Poison Ivy awaited their orders, while the mercenaries lashed out at the smoke monsters and cultists with a hail of bullets. The fighting was intense on the periphery, but the center of the field fell silent for a moment. What was Thea doing? She was busy sorting through her gift bag. This unfortunate archmage was the second human gift bag she had ever encountered. The previous Martian manhunter had also been defeated by fear, but at least Thea had needed to gather all the knowledge herself. This one, however, had presented itself to her. His mental power was obliterated by various hallucinations, and Thea had intercepted a large amount of his memories. At first, Thea wondered where all this came from. It wasn't until the old man's last breath that she understood. His soul, carrying his memories, dissipated, and Thea passed on all his life's knowledge. While it was far less powerful than the Martian manhunters, it was a match made in heaven. She had completely mastered a vast amount of magical applications, mysteries, trickery, and rituals. You guys go ahead. Stay with that blind man in a suit over there. Everyone else can be killed. Thea continued to sort through her tidbits. From the old man's memories, she knew that Mr. E was responsible for all external affairs. She could ask him about Malcolm. The others didn't have any powerful methods, and Poison Ivy and Deathstroke were more than capable of handling them. Sargon possessed a wealth of memories. Living to over 90 years old, he was the oldest of the four. He had traveled extensively and learned numerous spells. He could even perform the irony magic Thea had envied, though he wasn't quite proficient in it. Sargon's unique skill was gem magic. Through a special technique, he could encapsulate spells within gems, casting them upon reciting a specific word. It was similar to the spell scrolls in games. He accumulated a collection of spell gems and, in combat, unleashed them in a single burst. Few could withstand the onslaught. The old man's attacks were sharp. Zatara's irony magic offered incredible defense. Mr. E handled reconnaissance, and alchemist Tanorak was in charge of crafting magic items and deciphering traps. When the four of them were at their most close, they were arguably the world's most powerful mage team, bar none. Sadly, even the strongest friendships cannot withstand the test of time. Zatara's death created a rift between the four close friends, a rift that only widened today, culminating in Tanorak and Sargon's daughter, along with half of their followers, turning against Sargon and attacking him, severely wounding him. At this point in the original time frame, their plan had been successful. Sargon's daughter had seized her father's magical power, Mr. E had surrendered, and the Cold Flame Church remained largely unscathed. However, Thea's miraculous intervention completely altered the situation. Sargon, for some uncanny reason, had cast a single glance upon her, effectively dooming her. Without his magical power, the nose-ringed woman had become a worthless woman, and the situation had deteriorated to its utmost. Unraveling the chain of events from Sargon's memories, Thea lamented her and her companion's unforeseen arrival. 10 minutes earlier, they hadn't been shattered, and 10 minutes later, the nose-ringed woman had inherited his magical power and the mana gem. Is this the lucky attribute of Merlyn's sword? Thea fumbled with a sword that served as a necklace around her neck, thinking uncertainly. However, judging from the fact that this humanoid gift package was automatically delivered to her door for her to check, she was indeed lucky. Thea glanced at the situation in the field. Deathstroke did not ask Poison Ivy for help, and fought the alchemist Tanorak alone. The alchemist, who had originally not taken him seriously, was stunned by the barrage of magic-breaking bullets from Deathstroke, and had to take out the alchemical items he made to withstand it. Deathstroke's grenade launcher had been modified by Thea, and the ammunition it fired now were all high-speed armor-piercing bullets engraved with magic-breaking arrays. Thea did not have time to make them one by one, so she made a bullet, and then used artificial intelligence to repeatedly scan the engravings of the array, and used modern machinery to pick it out bit by bit. The fully automatic equipment could only produce a few rounds a day. The machine faithfully replicated her description. Its magic-breaking bullets were less aura-laden than her originals, but they were more convenient. Now, these bullets were concentrated in Deathstroke's hands. He had also been injected with Thea's super gene-enhancing fluid, his physical attributes rapidly increasing. Once a bear-like sturdy man, he now moved with the swiftness of an eagle, slashing left and right at the alchemist Tanarak, occasionally manipulating his weapons with invisible arms to fire various bullets into his magical shield. Alchemists weren't known for their immense magical powers, they were merely support personnel. His combat experience was far inferior to Deathstroke's. Without his shield, he was a mere mortal. Deathstroke's blade was so swift it left afterimages. He doubted he could withstand it with his 100+ pounds. His alchemical tools were rapidly depleting, and he was sweating profusely, but he had no idea how to break the deadlock. Poison Ivy gazed at the battlefield with a grin. She wasn't a belligerent type. When no one paid attention to her, she just played. That's right, she played. The seductive pheromones sprayed out, and from time to time she bewitched a few cultists to brandish machetes at their former companions. She was having a lot of fun. Chapter 415 Constantine and Zatanna. Controlling the cultists' mutual violence, trapping 2 iron golems, and simultaneously dealing with a frantic, yet utterly harmless, nose-ringed woman, preventing her from disrupting Deathstroke's battle. Poison Ivy's workload seemed overwhelming, but it wasn't at all daunting. While the cultists were ferocious, they were merely ordinary people, malnourished and prone to bloodshed and blood sacrifices, leaving them weaker than ordinary humans. The nose-ringed woman, a relative newcomer to the magical world, screamed with earth-shattering force. Thea suspected Damien, even with his full power of techno-magic and martial arts, could defeat her, making her a formidable foe. Poison Ivy possessed immense potential, effortlessly controlling the battlefield. Her methods were strange and mysterious, and while she wasn't a magician, she was more capable than a magician. Thea was extremely optimistic about her future. While they were engaged in this struggle, Thea dragged the body of old Sargon towards her. The old man, his head wrapped in a cloth, appeared to be Indian. At least Thea had received his gift package, but she showed little interest in his blackened corpse. She pulled a small cloth bag from the side of the corpse and opened it, revealing 5 or 6 dazzling gems. Thea pulled out a gem and, unfazed by the shouting and screaming of the battlefield, examined its quality by the torchlight. She curled her lips and cursed him, poor bastard. While not as deeply versed in gemstones as Catwoman, Thea, with her feminine innate talent, could tell that these gems were only of passable quality. Old Sargon had no idea that his body, nearly cold, was being met with such profound contempt. He felt helpless, too. Born into a wealthy Indian family, he was considered wealthy compared to his compatriots, whose trains carried tens of thousands of passengers. But compared to Thea, he was a complete pauper. First, wealth belonged to the family, not to him alone. The family had numerous branches, all of whom were begging for money. To avoid the scrutiny of the secular world, he didn't dare recklessly use magic to clear his path. India's conditions were rife with corruption, and the need for money was paramount, leaving him with limited wealth at his disposal. Secondly, his wealth came from the most basic industries, commonly known as land ownership. His family owned vast tracts of land across India, and tens of thousands of farmers helped cultivate the land each year. 200 years ago, this would have been something to boast about, but in today's information age, it only elicited sighs from the onlookers. Finally, and most crucially, he had met Zatara and his companions 30 years ago. The other 2 weren't wealthy, but Zatara, who lived in Gotham, was well off. The cult they founded was financed by Zatara and Sargon. With Zatara's death, the cult's funds were cut in half, and old Sargon had to dig out his own savings to barely survive. In such a dire economic crisis, he simply didn't have the spare cash to purchase gems. Thea scorned the old man's poverty. "You're so broke, why are you practicing gem magic? You fool, this skill seems like it could only flourish in my hands," Thea thought, shaking the bag of gemstones in her hands. "I'm the richest wizard, and the most skilled among the rich," she thought to herself. "Isn't that what they call I'm the richest among wizards, and the best at magic among the rich, gem magic? The gems come first, the magic comes second." This illustrates the importance of fine gems. Without boasting, I can say that, aside from those dragons hiding in some unknown dimension, Thea is the best at this kind of magic. She'd been so busy these past few years that she hadn't deliberately collected any jewelry. But as her fame grew, she was flooded with requests for meetings, visits, and friendships. A first meeting required a gift. It was basic social interaction. Those worthy of meeting her were either wealthy or noble, and to avoid being laughed at, these people went to great lengths to give them gifts. So what could a young woman like Thea give her? Jewelry was a sure thing. Although she refused many, more precious jewels and gems still filled her family's 12 safes. Among them were over 300 pieces etched in history, and if Thea hadn't given some to Diana, that number would have doubled. Catwoman had often sourly claimed that Thea was being targeted by an international thief, and for good reason. Using an earth spell, she dug a vast pit and buried the impoverished wizard Sargon, who was still obsessed with gems. Gazing at the battlefield, Thea's mind was already lost in imagining how many gems she would need to craft to blast Darkseid to the skies, when a flash of silver light interrupted her reverie. Teleportation array, a man and a woman emerged. The man wore a khaki trench coat, a stained white shirt underneath, and a loosely tied tie. He looked downcast, his face stubbled, and a cigarette dangling from his lips. He paid little attention to what had happened after the teleportation, seemingly desperately explaining something to the woman beside him. The woman, with her hair flowing freely, wore a purple coat over a white shirt with a plunging V-neck, showcasing her indescribably majestic figure. Her legs were clad in voluptuous fishnet stockings and leather boots. Her face was beautiful, her demeanor resolute, a stark contrast to the languid, cunning man beside her. Zha, listen to me. The Croydon compass can help you find anything. Enough, Constantine. I've had enough of your hypocritical lies and malicious help. You bastard, you scum. You always get me into trouble. I just want to find my father's relics. You, go on your own adventure, the purple-clad woman taunted the man with a rude spit. Then, stunned by the lively atmosphere in the square, she finished her words haltingly, perplexed by the situation before her. Her initial reaction echoed the Cold Flame Church's initial suspicion. This was a covert government force cracking down on a vibrant social organization. The man's reaction was much calmer than hers. A flicker of doubt flashed across his eyes, quickly replaced by a cynicism. The night wind was a bit strong. He shielded his lips with his hand as he lit the cigarette. He took a deep drag and said to the woman with a hint of intoxication, "None of this is my fault. You know, I was planning to sneak in." Sneaking in? Fuck. There were at least 1,000 people in the square. With so many people, not even a mosquito could get in. Considering the man's past misdeeds, the woman automatically imagined this was a special plot against her. Unable to figure out what was going on, the two of them took a quick look at the battlefield out of caution. The first thing that caught their eye was poison ivy, perched atop a 3-meter-high piranha plant. There was no magic involved. It was simply poison ivy's unassuming presence. Anyone with normal eyesight would be able to spot her. What is this? A human. The two knowledgeable mages were also captivated by poison ivy's bizarre life form. Was she human? Chapter 416 Xia's Irony Magic. Constantine and Zatanna, were they supposed to be here? Thea couldn't figure it out. From what they were saying, Zatanna seemed to be searching for her father's relics, while Constantine's goal was the same as old Maz, to find that compass. Could Malcolm really be here? Thea had previously thought it a bit cruel to exterminate an entire family just to get information, but now it seemed they weren't wronged. She immediately channeled the Eye of Horus, breaking through the layers of magical barriers and peering deeper into the castle. The intrusion of these two unexpected people caused Grand Alchemist Kenrak, already utterly ecstatic after being blasted by Deathstroke's magic destroying bullets, to roar with excitement. If these two had dared to come so brazenly to the Cold Flame Church an hour ago, he would have taught them a lesson they would never forget. But now, he was too busy to handle himself, and he couldn't figure out how Deathstroke, a giant, could have so many magic-destroying bullets. The alchemical products he had painstakingly accumulated over the years were rapidly depleting. If these two hadn't intervened, he would have been ready to flee. Zatanna. Come help me. I know where your father's relics are. He was my best friend. The Grand Alchemist knew Zatanna, in a way, having watched her grow up. As for whether they were truly best friends, only God knew. His plan was incredibly sinister. If he could get her to help, that would be great. If he couldn't, he'd draw the enemy towards Zatanna, giving him a chance to escape. So, he shouted with such force, his frail frame practically drawing on the energy of his Danshin. The sound resonated from his abdomen, echoing throughout the square. Midnight Father, who was dealing with Mr. E on the other side of the battlefield, also heard the shout. They'd exchanged blows for less than a minute before their fierce attacks had been tacitly understood. Now, hearing the Grand Alchemist's words, he spotted the man and woman appearing on the other side of the battlefield. He'd seen Zatanna in a photo, but had never dealt with her. But Constantine, He knew her all too well. The two were both friends and enemies, sometimes fighting, sometimes working together. No one understood Constantine better than he did. Glancing back at Thea, he found the eldest lady silent. Midnight Dad had no idea what she was up to, but to demonstrate his worth, he shouted to the other side. "Constantine, you scumbag! Your dad is here, come help me." Laughter and scolding were their way of dealing with things. Constantine, who had been smoking, was a little surprised. He put his cigarette between his fingers and looked intently. "Midnight Dad? Why are you here, you bastard? You actually dared to attack the Cold Flame Church? You're so bold." Cursing, Constantine's expression became 2 degrees more serious than before. This matter was getting serious. From his position, it was clear that Papa Midnight was in league with these soldiers armed with advanced weaponry. Constantine knew Midnight to be incredibly broke. Any one of these soldiers could buy out his shabby bar with their gear. He was definitely not a leader, but he was a glorious guide. Constantine scratched his tangled hair. He should have helped, both out of personal friendship and out of hostility towards the Cold Flame Church, but he truly didn't want to get involved in such a mess. As wise as he was, he could easily discern a deeper connection behind these soldiers. He shook his head slightly and held back Zatanna, who was about to enter the battlefield. "Niece Zatanna, come help your Uncle Tanarak. Don't you remember me holding you in my arms when you were little?" The Grand Alchemist's voice was a little hoarse from the effort he'd put in earlier, but he didn't care. He shamelessly begged for help. Even such a noble master had lost all sense of shame. Midnight, a man who mingled between the black and white, had no sense of shame, becoming even more unbridled. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "Constantine, my brother. We were drinking together just a week ago. How can you bear to see your brother being bullied?" The two exchanged barbs, just as they did on the World Channel. The Grand Alchemist's voice soon grew too much. He produced a black metal object and held it in his mouth. His voice instantly amplified countless times, vibrating the nighttime alpine valley. Midnight, undeterred, produced a slimy animal tongue and swallowed it in one gulp. His voice boomed across the earth. Initially, the two men summoned reinforcements, but after a few shouts, they engaged in a verbal exchange. The Grand Alchemist dismissed Midnight as a sewer rat, while Midnight mocked him as a maggot that only ate shit. "Shut up, everyone." The castle was awash in a riot of spells. Sia laboriously swept the entire place, finding no trace of Old Ma. Already frustrated, the escalating curses intensified, and she unleashed a wide area psychic blast, ignoring both ally and foe. Her voice wasn't loud, but its penetrating power was immense. Every ordinary person, mercenary or cultist alike, was knocked to their knees. Several magic users were visibly shaken. Midnight Dad, further away, suffered the least, shrinking back, refusing to utter a single word. Mystery, too, was deeply shaken. He was already debating whether to use Featherfall or glide when leaping from the cliff. The Grand Alchemist was the most unlucky. He was about to shout, but was frightened back. Death Knell, with his high willpower, was minimally affected. Seeing him suddenly exposed, he struck without hesitation. A bony left hand was severed, and the alchemist howled like a slaughtered pig. His barely maintained defense could no longer hold. Deathstroke struck with 3 furious blows, slicing the greed-obsessed master alchemist into several pieces. His movements were so swift that Zatanna, barely recovering from the shock, only cried out, "Stop!" Though she doubted the master alchemist's supposed friend of her father's generation, she was still furious at the thought of someone she knew dying before her eyes. She drew out a small staff and pointed it at Deathstroke, a burst of purple light radiating out. "Zah, stop!" Constantine was still a step too late. In his mind, the members of the Cold Flame Church were his enemies. The more dead, the better. Revenge for the alchemist? Wasn't that insane? "Go back." Thea, disliked by this impetuous woman, extended her left hand, and a wave of invisible energy flashed between her white fingers. This was the irony magic that had made them famous. This spell was profound. Thea had only accessed the memories of the wizard Sargon, not Zadara. Furthermore, the wizard wasn't particularly skilled in this technique during his lifetime. It was only through learning and sharing with a few friends that he learned the spell, though he was still far from mastering it. However, Thea, with her high magical power, didn't need much skill, so she cast it easily. Chapter 417 The Legendary Senior? As if intercepted by some powerful force, The flying purple energy beam reversed mid-air, shooting back towards Zatanna. "Ironics," Zatanna exclaimed in shock. She had only just begun to master this spell, still some way from mastering it. Competitive by nature, she spread her hands, attempting to return the spell. This was a unique family skill, many of which were unknown to the public, and she didn't believe she was any better than others. Go back, her aura was impressive, her application, technique, and timing impeccable. However, there was a fundamental difference between her and Thea's total magical power. At her peak, she might have been able to match Thea's for a few moves, but now, today, a vast gulf existed between them. Her family's secrets didn't redirect the magic, nor could they even slow it down. The purple beam relentlessly charged towards its original owner. "Zatanna, get out of the way," Constantine spit out his cigarette butt, leaping into the air and making what he considered a heroic and manly save. Of course, without the dusty looks on their faces, the scene would have been even more perfect. Thea gritted her teeth at this scene. Zatanna's skill was obvious, but Constantine's was more uncertain. It wasn't that he was hiding his true abilities, but rather that his yellow trench coat, acquired from Nick Necro, shielded Thea from detection. The coat was of exceptional quality, and judging by the aura lingering on it, it was undoubtedly a high-level magical artifact. "What is the origin of this man? My pheromones can't control him," Poison Ivy's voice reached Thea. Thea nodded. The coat had incredibly high resistance to various attacks, so it wasn't surprising that it could resist Poison Ivy's control. She pointed with her chin at Mystery, who was fighting Midnight Daddy on the other side, signaling Poison Ivy to come over there and help. She watched Zatanna, who was being pounced on and thrown to the ground by the hungry tiger, and Constantine, who seemed brave but hadn't revealed his true colors. Constantine's power fluctuated constantly. At his peak, he could seal the king of hell, but at his weakest, he was beaten by street thugs and had his soul picked up by the jailers. It was hard to tell whether he was just pretending or just a weakling. Instead of using irony, Thea used her own magic, a blend of water, wind, and fire, creating lightning. Thea intentionally increased the proportion of fire, creating a dark orange-red instead of the traditional vibrant blue. She raised her finger, aiming it at the two men. The orange-red lightning plowed a deep furrow in the ground and hurtled towards them. She controlled the orange-red lightning, making it less fast and more violent. She still wanted to test Constantine's abilities. Halfway through its journey, the lightning split into three, blocking all possible angles for evasion and attacking the two from three directions. Seeing no escape, Constantine tapped the ground with his left foot. A purple halo rose, enveloping the two men. Orange lightning struck the halo, but there was no violent energy collision, no dazzling electro-optical effect. The three bolts of lightning vanished like hot water on ice. An octagonal arrangement, depicting runes representing the sun, moon, and stars. This is a magic circle used by the 15th century great wizard John Day to ward off the drain. This circle can negate any harm from supernatural forces and magic. Wow, you're handling it well. Have you been drawing this circle since you teleported here? You have a strong sense of danger, Thea casually commented on his magic circle. Hearing her casually explain its origins, Constantine's face darkened slightly, but he remained confident and pulled out another cigarette and lit it. He didn't expect Thea's next words to make his face change drastically. "Are you Thomas Constantine's son? You look a lot like your father." Thea was so beautiful that it was almost bubbling. No wonder Deathstroke treated everyone like a child. It felt so good to act like a senior. Constantine and Zatanna exchanged glances, each seeing the question in the other's eyes. "Who is this guy? Who else in the world knows your family's irony magic? Have you taught it to anyone?" Constantine asked quietly. Zatanna shook her head. "A few of my father's friends probably know it, but I certainly haven't taught them." They sat in silence. Knowing Constantine's father, knowing how to use irony magic, and his magical power as profound as the ocean, the conclusion was obvious: this was a veteran. To reinforce the impression, Thea recounted her experience a century ago. "Your grandfather died fighting on the Somme, and I was the one who returned his remains to your father. When I met your father, he wasn't even 10 years old." Time flies. Constantine produced 3 detection tools in quick succession, all showing the same truth. Thea hadn't lied at all, which gradually strengthened his belief. It wasn't uncommon for someone with profound magical powers to live for a century. This wasn't a lie. Thea wasn't lying, but she hadn't mentioned the fact that she was in a time-traveling state at the time and hadn't seen Thomas since. After repeated misdirection, Constantine had the illusion that this person was either a friend of his father or grandfather. "Do you really know my father?" "Yes, boy. Tell your female companion to stop. I'll explain in detail later." Thea exuded the demeanor of a master. Midnight Dad, who knew her true identity and had been dealing with Constantine for many years, overheard their entire conversation and almost burst out laughing. Constantine, a lifelong swindler, had actually been deceived by another person. How could she, a billionaire, know Constantine's alcoholic father? The age difference was completely wrong. He believed that Thea's magical prowess had deceived Constantine's detection device. While amused, he also felt a sense of awe for Thea. The seed of suggestion had finally been planted in his consciousness. After securing Constantine and the other two, Thea finally had time to deal with the blind old man, Mr. E, surrounded by Midnight Dad, Poison Ivy, and Garcia. The old man couldn't withstand a single blow. Before he could even leap off the cliff, he was entangled in Poison Ivy's strange vines. The vines pulled the blind old man toward Thea, who asked, "Actually, we're here today to ask a question. Do you know Malcolm Merlyn? Do you know who he last interacted with or where he disappeared to?" Thea displayed elegant demeanor and politely inquired, but her words struck Mr. E like thunder. "Seriously? You came into our house, shouting about war and killing, only to find out?" Mr. E stared at Thea with his eyeless eyes, a hint of disbelief. His clairvoyance allowed him to see the world in 360 degrees. Without even turning his head, he looked at the great alchemist who was chopped into several pieces and lying in a pool of blood in the distance. He felt really sorry for this old friend. His death was so unjust. These vicious monsters were not government officials who were purging vibrant social organizations. They just came here to inquire about news because our Cold Flame Church was famous. Chapter 418, Handshake and Peace. He wasn't particularly saddened by the alchemist's death. After all, they were already at odds. How hypocritical would one be to grieve over someone so blinded by greed and betrayal? He simply wanted to muddle through the difficult situation. Malcolm Merlyn? Did he have such a man on his side? To further his impression, Thea pulled out her phone again, intending to show him a photo, but quickly realized, damn, he was blind. Fortunately, she had a wealth of resources. Using teleportation, she could transmit an image of old Ma into his mind, allowing her to glimpse his true thoughts. If he harbored resentment, she'd kill him; if not, she'd spare his life. After accessing all of Archmage Sagan's memories, Thea understood the entire course of their conflict. It was safe to say that if she hadn't led her men in attacking, the two would have been doomed. From another perspective, she'd even saved the blind old man's life. "We don't know much about this person. I only know that he had a conflict with Felix Faust in Northern Europe. I don't know anything about him after that." Mr. E took out a thick piece of parchment from his bag and traced it with his old fingers. Xia thought it was Braille. After a long while, the old man said it with certainty. The old man was very relieved. He checked again and again and finally confirmed that this person and this incident had nothing to do with him. "You guys have been smashing and looting our house for a long time. Now that the truth is out, can we retreat? You have to know that cultists also have divinity." Xia scratched her head. The fighting subsided. None of their group of people who were asking for directions died. There were only 6 or 7 injured. One of their mechanical exoskeleton was severely heated and shut down urgently. The economic losses were basically in firearms and ammunition. A few $1,000,000 would be recovered. The other side was different. 2 of the 4 pillars had fallen, one frightened to death, the other hacked to death. The only remaining leader had been captured. The square was littered with crimson-robed corpses. Excluding those killed in internecine battles and those killed by the demonic rituals, a conservative estimate was that at least 300 had been killed. Only a few dozen newer believers remained, trembling behind trees and rocks. The Cold Flame Church, once a vibrant international organization led by 4 archmages, had been brought down to earth by her. From a vibrant international organization, it had been reduced to a regional one, reduced to the size of Midnight Dad's bar. It was a truly tragic situation. Eliminate the root of the problem? The thought crossed Thea's mind. Mr. E, incredibly perceptive, realized the crucial moment had arrived. "I swear a true spirit oath to live in peace from now on. I will never pursue today's events. On the contrary, if you help us quell the rebellion, Cold Flame will reward you handsomely." He then cut off a finger, chanting a repetitive incantation. Soon, 15 golden symbols were pressed against his heart. The blind old man groaned, and it was clear this was a heavy burden on him. He was a man of time, and he was truly decisive. His oath was connected to his heart. If he broke it, it would explode into smithereens. Okay, I believe you. As for the generous gift, it's completely unnecessary. Xia decided to let them go. The Cold Flame Church had been operating for over 30 years, with adherents worldwide. The numbers were just a matter of degree. Eliminating all of them today wouldn't change anything. Cutting the grass would certainly cut it, but eradicating the root would be much more troublesome. She couldn't possibly hunt down all the Cold Flame adherents scattered around the world. The young lady didn't have the time. Besides, there were plenty of crazy people in this world who loved to delve into cults. Those that existed would persist. If they extinguished the Cold Flame today, all the hardened Cold Flames would pop up tomorrow. They couldn't be killed off completely. Refusing their generous gifts would be pretentious. What kind of generous gifts could these poor bastards possibly have? Knowing old Sargon's memories, Thea knew it all. Their finances were barely functioning. Previously, they could rely on the old Indian man and the alchemist to make small things for a living. Now that both were dead, could Mr. E be expected to start a blind massage parlor to make some money? If his men were more normal, Thea could have taken them all in. But these crazy cultists? Joining his own ranks would be enough to cause more trouble. Let them stay in seclusion and recover. Mr. E breathed a sigh of relief. Although Thea said she didn't want a generous gift, he still ordered his men to bring out a large bag as a gift and quickly sent these evil spirits packing. We're sorry for being so hasty and causing you so much trouble. We can't accept these gifts. No, you've done me a great favor. These small gifts are just a token of my appreciation. Please accept them. Thea refused, but the blind old man insisted. The two of them were humble and yielding, and if you ignored the corpses strewn across the floor, the scene was quite harmonious. Well, I'll accept it with all my heart. If the Holy See needs anything in the future, you can contact us through Midnight Father. Thea felt the bag was bulging with so much stuff, and couldn't resist his hospitality. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted it and made a promise, marking the beginning of a friendship between the two. Where's Croydon's compass? Constantine, who had been silent until then, watching them shake hands and make peace, suddenly interjected. Was Old Man E's expression a bit grim? Thea remained composed. Even without Constantine's warning, she could already guess the blind old man's intentions. Their power was severely weakened, and they had previously roamed the world collecting magical items, offending countless people. Now, he was taking this opportunity to publicly pass this hot potato on to her. It was his idea. Thea didn't care. These modern wizards posed no threat to her, and her identity hadn't been exposed. Anyone with ulterior motives could only target Deathstroke, Poison Ivy, and Midnight, three of whom were no pushovers and more than capable of handling any trouble. Bring that woman over here for me to examine, Thea instructed, pointing to the woman with a nose ring wrapped in vines. Power, profound power. Give me all your power, you old bastard, the nose ring woman continued to chatter. Thea used her telepathic power to peer into her brain and examined it. The woman's rapid surge of joy and sorrow had damaged her brain, leaving her thoughts in a state of confusion. She was no longer a threat, having gone completely insane. After digging into Sargon's memories, it turned out the old Indian man had been quite kind to his daughter. It was just that India's patriarchal ideology had repeatedly strained their relationship, ultimately leading to today's patricide. For the old man's sake, please spare his crazy daughter. Where's Felix Faust? I'll go ask him, Thea said, waving Poison Ivy to take him away. She casually tossed the gift bag into her interspatial ring and politely asked Mr. E. Midnight. Dad and Mr. E. shuddered simultaneously. Are you going to ask again? The blind old man, believing that if I don't live well, you won't live well either, drew a map and researched the information he knew, detailing it to the young lady. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 419, The Person Was Found. After giving a detailed explanation of the location, Mr. E escorted them, including Constantine and Zatanna, out of the castle like the plague. He ignored the shattered statues and shattered gates along the way, and Zatanna failed to recognize the shattered mass on the ground as her father's statue. Only after they vanished into the night did the blind old man breathe a sigh of relief, a surge of excitement at the same time. The business the four had built was now entirely his. Leaving aside the blind old man, whose joint venture had become a wholly owned subsidiary, Thea counted her gains and divided the spoils on the way back. Here, Thea tossed Deathstroke a katana, glowing green. The blade was enchanted with acid, dealing physical damage amplified by acid upon impact. While many enemies were immune to fire and ice, few were immune to acid. Poison Ivy was given a pair of wristbands that allowed her to zip through the forest. While this item might seem useless to others, it was perfectly suited to her. She could easily create vast quantities of plants, which was considered a forest skill. These wristbands significantly compensated for her lack of mobility, making them a powerful weapon for both attack and escape. Here's one for you. It should be able to nourish your little skeleton, Thea said, picking and choosing. Void-related items were scarce, and she finally found a tablet-sized stone slab with strange childlike scribbles. Within it, a small, lifeless space was perfectly suited for Midnight Daddy. His prehistoric little skeleton was badly damaged, and with the help of this slab, it could at least regain some of its power. After dividing the spoils, she watched them return to camp. With over 300 people and their vast amounts of equipment, it was better to take a transport plane. Opening a portal was too laborious. Thea magically extracted the 2 iron golems and gave them to Deathstroke to take back to Metropolis. She would study them later. She planned to travel alone to Northern Europe to find Felix Faust. He had an observatory, usually hidden in another dimension. This time, there was only one enemy, so more people would be useless. The mercenaries filed out, no one asking who the suddenly appearing man in black was or why he stayed there. They left quickly, leaving only Thea, Constantine, and Zatanna. My dear nephews, do you have anything else to do? Thea looked at them curiously. Felix, sister, Constantine, already on his way to the end of his cigarette, spitted out the puffs he'd taken in with annoyance. The compass consists of 3 parts. The Cold Flame Church only holds 2. The remaining part is in the hands of my friend. I hope you'll hand it over to me. This item is very dangerous. In the hands of ordinary people, it would cause great trouble. Xia hadn't taken the compass seriously at first, but now that Constantine spoke of it so seriously, her regard for it instantly increased 2 levels. My gift cannot be refused, but no one can take anything from me without my consent. John Constantine, you're no match for me. Xia's tone was as cold as the wind. Don't be angry, don't be angry. I'm just trying to talk things over. Zha, you two, have a word and start fighting. The playful Zha Kang raised his hands high in a gesture of surrender. Sensing that Xia was captivated by his antics, he drew a series of red lines with his hands, and a rose-red magic circle appeared at Xia's feet. Old senior, please hand over the item. Although you've concealed it well, my nose tells me you're a woman. This magic circle only works on women. Zha Kang raised the collar of his windbreaker, trying to dissuade her with words, looking for a flaw. Thea remained unmoved. What a joke. These were spells from Constantine's family magic book. Breaking them was too easy, but what was the point of simply breaking them? Drawing on the knowledge of Master Sargon and combining it with the principles of magic circles, Thea found another method, one that no one had used before. With her hands raised, she followed the flow of the magic circle and forcibly lifted it from the ground. She rotated it 360 degrees twice, as if displaying a product. Little John, your hasty drawing is quite good, but there's too much accumulated magic at this point, making it easy to disrupt. The lines at this point are too complicated and could be simplified, like a teacher teaching a student. She meticulously reviewed a circle, then tossed it aside like trash, leaving nothing behind in a puff of smoke. To help you remember it better, I'm giving you an assignment today, Thea said, drawing out a Death King's staff. As the two stared in horror, the staff emitted a silent, black light, striking them directly. The black light swirled and swept them into the space between the material world and the dark plane. This was a modified labyrinthine technique of the hunting goddess. Eris had been trapped for over 10 minutes. They didn't need such a sophisticated maze. A pitch-black shadow maze would have been enough to keep them occupied for days. These two are so audacious, ignoring the miserable Cold Flame Church and daring to challenge me. If I don't teach you a lesson, you'll suffer greatly in the future. Thea clapped her hands gently, determined the direction, opened a portal to Norway, and left the scene. How would she find herself in the vast sea of Norwegian people? Fortunately, Constantine offered Thea a good idea, the Croydon compass. After searching among Mr. E's gift, she finally found the needle and dial. Technically, it was a compass. The missing part was a lens, which, as expected, was in the hands of Zakin's friend. Although it was currently incomplete and unusable for ordinary people, it would be perfectly usable by a magician. Between searching for Malcolm and the unfortunate Felix Faust, Thea chose to look for Old Ma first. She channeled magic power into the needle, causing it to spin rapidly in midair. Within 10 seconds, it gave Thea a vague signal: "Found it, not bad. I should get it back later." Thea was delighted. This was much faster than her scouring the mountains with the Eye of Horus. She cast invisibility on herself, constantly correcting her direction, and flew from the city toward the suburbs. The closer she got, the stronger the signal from the needle became. After her third search, Thea reached the foot of a mountain. The mountain itself contained a large amount of metal, severely obstructing her vision, but Thea still spotted Malcolm standing at the entrance of the cave. She breathed a sigh of relief, remembering how many innocent lives had been sacrificed in her search for him. "The cold flame church, we died unjustly." Thea, Malcolm's expression had been serious, but when he saw her remove her cloak and emerge from the darkness, a heartfelt joy instantly crossed his face. Chapter 420 Ilgen. "How did you find this place?" Old Ma asked excitedly after a gentle embrace between father and daughter. "Of course, Xia couldn't say that. To find you, I led over 300 people from the United States to Switzerland, and then from Switzerland to Norway, leaving corpses and rivers of blood along the way. The ammunition consumed caused the price of arms on the international black market to increase by 5% year on year." She was vague about her story and simply held out the pointer, saying that it was how she found you. "But why did you end up in such a remote place? I heard you were looking for this pointer, right? Could there be a magical artifact here?" Xia looked at the dilapidated cave. The mountain was simply rocky, and it looked like a sword stuck in the cracks of the stone. "My story is a long one, but someone got injured trying to save me. Can you come and help me take a look?" Old Ma said, pulling Xia inside. The cave wasn't deep, and the smell wasn't pleasant. It was probably some beast's lair, seized by Malcolm. Father and daughter rounded a bend and came into view. A narrow chamber, its walls clad in strange rocks, was visible. A slightly flatter area on the left was covered in weeds. A middle-aged man, covered in blood, sat against the wall. He was weak, but he managed to keep one eye open. The moment he saw Thea, his pupils contracted sharply, and his limp arm suddenly regained strength. Pointing at her, he asked uncertainly, "Do you have Merlyn's blood in you?" Thea also sensed a familiar aura around him and looked at Malcolm, puzzled. Old Ma's face grimaced. "Jason Blood, this is my daughter. I've told you twice, I'm also of Merlyn's bloodline. Can't you tell?" The middle-aged man on the ground strained his eyes open, carefully comparing father and daughter. He shook his head honestly. "Sorry, my friend, your daughter's bloodline is obvious, but I really can't tell from yours." Malcolm nearly fainted. "Is my bloodline this bad?" He sat down on the ground, frustrated, and remained silent. Thea felt a little sad. The old man had never received a divine blood injection and was still an ordinary person. His temples were even a little gray from his years of traveling. The desire for power wasn't a bad thing, as long as it could be controlled. Thea had always been steadfast in her efforts to strengthen those around her. Old Ma's questions weren't appropriate to be asked in front of outsiders, and he had no intention of introducing the middle-aged man. Thea was no longer the weak girl she had been 5 years ago. She had her own ways to find answers. She glanced over. The man was seriously injured, but strangely, he possessed a vital force so surging it was explosive. If he could mobilize even a fraction of that energy, it would be enough to heal his injuries. "Who is this guy?" the young lady pondered, unaware that her prying eyes had triggered a drastic change within the middle-aged man, whose face was filled with agony. "Descendant of Merlyn, retreat. I can't control this anymore." "Huh?" Seeing the problem, Thea calmly drew several mysterious spells through the air. Then, with a gentle tap of her hands, they struck the middle-aged man's limbs and heart. The trembling man suddenly calmed down and lay on the ground, gasping for breath. After a brief exchange, combined with a familiar plot, the middle-aged man's identity finally clicked. "You are Jason Blood, a knight of King Arthur. The demon within you is Ethlogan. The one sealed by Merlyn that day, Right, Malcolm, who had been sitting on the ground, feeling depressed, his mind now filled with British mythology, perked up immediately. You are one of King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table? Is that your alias now? Seeing her father's guilty look, Thea wasn't sure if she was right to trick him out of Star City. The man was practically obsessed. She explained on the middle-aged man's behalf, it's not an alias. Jason Blood is his real name. However, he's just a knight of King Arthur, not a knight of the Round Table. Because of the demon within him, he's lived for 1,500 years. Malcolm's disappointment was visibly evident, and his tone naturally tinged with disdain. So he's just an ordinary knight. How could an ordinary knight live this long? He shook his head repeatedly in disbelief. Now it was the middle-aged man's turn to be frustrated. What's wrong with an ordinary knight? Ordinary knights are human too. Just because I'm not a knight of the Round Table, does that mean I deserve scorn? The middle-aged man, already severely injured, was now tormented by the demon within him. He could no longer control his groggy mind, his eyes closed, his neck twisted, and he fainted. Is there any way to save him? He saved my life back then. If it's too difficult, forget it. Malcolm didn't know Thea's abilities. He remembered her as someone who was still at the level of years ago. He didn't want his daughter to pay too much for his request. Thea examined the middle-aged man's injuries carefully. There were 2 bloody wounds in his stomach and shoulder. They looked like penetrating wounds, but clearly not caused by bullets or other weapons. Her father's request couldn't be ignored. Furthermore, this guy was somewhat related to Merlyn. Even if treatment was a hassle, the young lady had to bite the bullet. A treatment cabin in this isolated cave didn't even have a power source, making it impossible to find one. Building a power source would be even more difficult. After much deliberation, Thea concluded that magic was the only option. A normal person would have cast 2 healing spells and been done with it, but this creature harbored a powerful demon within it. Healing spells are generally light and water-based, but this demon, unsurprisingly, was dark and fire-based, 2 energies diametrically opposed. Thea had to suppress the demon before she could heal it. She tore off her cloak, revealing her natural attire, and channeled her magical energy. The entire cave resonated with her. When her magical energy reached its peak, her hands, shimmering with a vast halo of energy, pressed against the middle-aged man's wound. Thea had initially attempted to communicate with the demon, but as soon as her magical energy entered, sensing its distinctive bloodline, the demon went berserk, disregarding its host's body and launching a frenzied counterattack. I still don't believe I can't cure you. We can't defeat the 3 Palaces demon, but we can handle a demon transformed from a human. To subdue the creature, Thea donned her long unused lantern ring, unleashing a 100-fold surge of fear energy. With increasing skill in harnessing her emotions, Thea dodged Malcolm, and a yellow energy filled the small cave. Magic and emotion merged once again, forcibly suppressing the demon Idolgin's counterattack. The overwhelming fear brought some clarity back to the demon, allowing it to withdraw some of its power to facilitate Thea's treatment. However, Thea didn't trust him. What if he had a seizure and did something while she was treating him? Regardless, she used her immense energy to seal Idolgin tightly, preventing him from escaping for a short time. Only then did she begin treating the middle-aged man. Chapter 421, Knock on the Door. The actual treatment went much more smoothly. They cleared the wound of residual magic, stimulated cell growth, and accelerated healing. As for the missing blood, Thea was at a loss. This old man had lived for over 1,500 years, so who knew what his blood type was now? Thea was sweating profusely. 1 minute of treatment took 9 minutes to suppress the demon. What's going on? I see you're not injured, so why is this guy on the ground? Thea turned to look at old Ma, though his clothes were a little disheveled. He was in perfect condition, showing no signs of injury. Considering old Ma's claim that Idolgin had saved his life, Thea was surprised they had come together. Malcolm began to recount his experiences, a rather cliched tale. This knight on the ground, who had lived for 1,500 years but still looked quite immature, was someone old Ma had met in England. He usually disguised himself as a knowledgeable scholar. The 2 of them traveled together, chatting and chatting, becoming something of a friendship. The knight hadn't lied. He truly sensed no trace of the old horse's bloodline and simply assumed Merlyn's last name was a coincidence. They were searching for the compass, but were unexpectedly ambushed by Felix Faust, a man they had no grudge against. Chasing him, the old horse, sensing something was amiss, resorted to a unique technique he'd learned from Nandarbit, feigning death. He pretended to fall off a cliff, using a special breathing technique and a special drug to completely suppress his heartbeat. This supposedly fooled the enemy, but the knight, believing his good friend to be dead, unleashed his demonic restraints and engaged Felix Faust in a frenzy, leaving both the evil wizard and himself severely wounded. By the time the cunning Malcolm returned from the foot of the mountain, he discovered the evil wizard had fled and the Chunibaku knight lying wounded and dying. With all his means of communication lost, he could only drag the knight to a nearby cave for treatment. The cave was so remote, the intelligent old horse didn't dare venture far, and was temporarily stranded. This, Thea thought, was the difference between a hero and a villain. Old Ma had feigned death with such skill that he had fooled not only his enemies but even his own people, while this hero ended up seriously injured. We've found the pointer. Shall I take you back to Star City? That guy on the ground has lost a lot of blood and needs to rest. No, I want to continue the investigation. This Felix Faust is also my target. Old Ma flatly rejected the suggestion of returning to Star City. Yes, I've also received news. Faust has found the temple of the dark great wizard Morgan Le Fay. He's very important. The knight lying on the ground had regained consciousness and spoke in a halting voice. How, Thea explained to Malcolm, half smiling as she watched the knight. Although this fellow is only an ordinary knight, the demon within him is a great knight. He fell in love with the dark wizard Morgan Le Fay, King Arthur's sister, and betrayed his companions. Merlyn transformed him into a demon. Only by killing Morgan Le Fay can he return to human form. So how did the two of them end up in the same body? All I remember is that Jason Blood was seriously injured, and Merlyn sealed the demonized Idelgin into a human body. It's a complicated story anyway, Thea sighed. Descendant of Merlyn, you are truly knowledgeable. You're right. I must kill Morgan Le Fay to achieve redemption, both Idelgin's and mine. The residual magic from his wounds cleared, and his body quickly recovered, now able to sit up shakily. Hearing him talk about being a descendant of Merlyn, Malcolm's annoyance returned. His daughter's blood was so strong that it made him, his biological father, seem fake. Isn't this generational inheritance too much? For a moment, all three lost interest in the conversation, each focused on their own questions. How about this? I'll go capture that guy, and you guys can question him. Thea reflected on the original plot. Felix Faust had indeed discovered a temple in the Peruvian jungle, containing the remains of Morgan Le Fay and a map that Morgan and Merlyn had deduced together to find the so-called Book of Magic. This Book of Magic was hilarious, causing a lot of trouble for the magical community. Constantine and his arrogant best friend, Nick Necro, staged a brilliant act of betrayal and counter-betrayal. When the dust settled, it was revealed that the so-called Book of Magic was actually a technological gadget that led to a world called Iperk, where all supernatural forces were rejected. Constantine could no longer lie, the dead were brought back to life, and the eternally youthful Lady Xanadu nearly died of old age. In short, this plot was full of malicious intentions on the part of the writers. Originally, Thea hadn't intended to get involved, the idea of a map was a joke. But then she suddenly remembered Morgan Le Fay's remains. This was the great wizard who had battled Merlyn his entire life. Thea didn't believe someone of his caliber would die. Perhaps her remains held some secret? Even if things were peaceful, Thea would have gone to him. Besides, Faust bullied his own father. That was simply a disrespect. It was only because this grandson was hiding in an alternate dimension that Thea would have unleashed a fuel air bomb. Finding this guy's alternate dimension would take some effort. Members of the Cold Flame Church had targeted him, ambushing him twice, only to be thwarted by his retreat. Considering the possibility of a surprise attack, Old Ma, with a seriously injured knight, believed the cave was not far from Faust's alternate dimension. Thea closed her eyes, using her mental power to sense the world's connections, searching for his hiding place. Descendant of Merlyn, the other party is a very powerful wizard. Shut up. Thea glanced at him indifferently. This guy also likes to act like a big shot. 1,500 years have been wasted, and without the demon within him, he's nothing but a weakling. Yet, he acts so solemn every day, as if he's madly indecisive, wanting to have a word with everyone he sees. Without the demon's help, he would have been hacked to death long ago. In Thea's eyes, he was on the same level as Hawkman and Hawkgirl. Thea always felt that time was insufficient, using every minute as if it were two. These guys, on the other hand, have been idling for thousands of years, making their lives a waste of food. Found it. I'll be back soon. Using Sagan's technique, He broke through the spatial barrier and teleported directly into the other party's alternate dimension. Is this really your daughter? This is the most powerful wizard of our time I've ever seen, Jason Blood asked Malcolm uncertainly, watching the deep blue portal disappear. Old Ma was both proud and depressed. The gap between him and his daughter was widening. He didn't dwell on the question too much. A modern wizard? What level would my daughter be in ancient times? It's hard to say. She's definitely not as good as your ancestor Merlyn. This time, Jason Blood finally brought Old Ma along. However, she would have been a very powerful wizard in King Arthur's time. At least a demon in my body can't defeat her. Chapter 422 Felix Faust. Thea, unaware of the conversations behind her back, had expected to be transported to the enemy's lair, but a strange wave suddenly deflected her teleportation point, causing the entire teleportation to shift by hundreds of meters. This was a tiny space, completely shrouded in white mist, like a layer of hazy glass. Looking out, one could see the sun, moon, stars, mountains, and rivers of the material world. In the center of the space, traces of human magical excavation were visible, suggesting that this small space had taken considerable time to create. All that could be seen was a suspended dark gray rock, upon which rested the resemblance of a two-story building. Sargon's memories mention that this was discovered by the magician Miriam of the early 12th century. This mage, though not of high skill or aptitude, had incredible luck. Discovering this small area opened up by previous generations in the gap between space and time. With no hope of becoming a grand mage, this mage, imitating the ancients, built a mage tower in an attempt to reach a higher realm. Unfortunately, his good fortune wouldn't last forever. During a fierce mage-to-mage confrontation, he perished like an ant in the aftermath. This area lay dormant for centuries until Felix Faust discovered it and built less than a fifth of the mage tower. Materials for a mage tower were already incredibly scarce in the 12th century, and even today, they're practically impossible. Faust, lacking supernatural powers, could only make minor modifications to the original structure, ultimately transforming the ruins into the two-story building we see today. Xia couldn't agree with this guy's aesthetic. If it's called an observatory, why not make it more ethereal, he decided. To emphasize its grandeur, he'd clad the exterior in gold. The glittering gold of the low, two-story building might have been mistaken for a converted mage tower, while others might have mistaken it for some kind of farmhouse. Rustic, outdated, and shabby, these were the young lady's words about this place. However, its functionality was still quite good. The diversion of her teleportation coordinates proved that the building possessed considerable defensive features. The Cold Flame Church needed to send someone to knock on the door, but that was completely unnecessary here. They were simply looking for trouble. The young lady raised her hand and unleashed a ball of lightning. Amidst a crackling flash of lightning, the ball struck the observatory's main door. Who dares to unleash this? A sharp voice echoed as the gold-clad gate effortlessly withstood Thea's attack. The man, a middle-aged man, dressed in an ancient robe emblazoned with stars and moons, sported a long, shaggy beard, and wore a golden headband. He slowly flew out, his appearance reminiscent of a hermit, though his expression held a hint of surliness. "Are you Felix Faust?" Thea flew directly to his level and whispered. The gloomy middle-aged man looked at Xia carefully. A young woman, yet she flew on her own without any spells or props? How could that be possible? Without the stone that connected his feet to the observatory, he couldn't fly. "Woman, are you from the Cold Flame Church?" Faust was no stranger to fame. He saw that Xia's method of breaking through the boundary was identical to Sargon's, and he formed a conclusion. The Cold Flame Church was notorious for its evil. He was alone, while the other side had four. In this small space, with the endless mana of the observatory, he wasn't afraid of a few people, but if he went outside, he would be no match. The magician's mobility was so strong that if he was entangled by one, the next second it would be four against him, and he had no chance of winning. He tried to dissuade Thea from the attack by revealing its origins. The observatory's magical power had been accumulated over 800 years in another dimension, and using it sparingly wasted. The Vatican was a bunch of lunatics. 10 would fight for everyone they defeated. Wasting precious mana on such a battle was unworthy. He felt his gentle words had deterred the enemy, and he considered himself a great courtesy to the Vatican. But the young lady, looking for trouble today, wasn't prepared to engage in idle conversation. She took out the staff of the dead king. The golden staff perfectly suited Faustine aesthetics, He felt it was destined for him. The choice between letting the enemy go or keeping him captive swirled in his mind. "Leave the staff, and I'll let you go," greed prevailed. Thea nearly vomited. How could someone actually say such idiotic villainous things? This bastard was disgusting. Talking to him was a waste of time. A surge of magical power poured into the staff, and a torrent of water erupted from the void. In the material world, such a large-scale attack would inevitably cause casualties, but here, there was no such problem. The massive current, carrying unparalleled kinetic energy, slammed down on the observatory from above. So powerful, Faust was stunned. He couldn't tell if it was the staff's power or Thea's own magic. Without time to think, he pulled out a thick book and flipped to a page. A flash of purple light appeared, and dark brown lines appeared on the surface of the observatory. Facing the oncoming water, it stood firmly in place like a reef. Was this the original control hub of the Mage Tower? Thea glanced at the book and stopped reading. The Mage Tower could indeed provide a lot of help, but that golden age was gone, and the scarcity of various materials was driving people crazy. The result of bowing to reality was a small 2-story building. What was the point of such a lingering existence? Just bulldoze it. If there was a tower spirit, it would be grateful. In midair, Thea waved her staff repeatedly, summoning a massive sea beast from thin air. It lacked facial features, its body nearly transparent. Where it might have been a mouth was a dense network of 3 layers of fangs, and beneath it were dozens of tentacles with suction cups. Like a hermit crab, it dragged a dark green shell from behind. This was a biological specimen Phyra had retrieved from a distant planet at her behest. The actual sea beast had been dead for countless years, but its genes had survived. According to scholars from that planet, it possessed the ability to grow infinitely. In ancient times, it devoured most of the planet's life. Later, rather than being slain by the heroes, it starved to death, setting civilization back 1,000 years. Using Kryptonian genetic technology, Thea reactivated certain fragments in its cells and used artificial intelligence to simulate a growth environment. She abruptly halted the experiment midway, destroying all cells. The creature's growth was terrifying. Doomsday had a kryptonite weakness, but aside from its appetite and inability to fly, it possessed few flaws. The phantom summoned before him was none other than the 30-year-old juvenile form of the sea beast. She had used immense amounts of magic to simulate its true form. Despite not knowing the sea beast's origins, Faust felt a chill run down his spine. Needless to say, the phantom monster's sharp teeth and mouth made it seem unjust. This only confirmed Faust's identity. This woman must be a member of the Cold Flame Church. Chapter 423, Strong Attack. Using Sargon's boundary-breaking magic, wielding an ancient-style staff, he launched interaction without a word. Then came the flood and the evil beast. With so many striking characteristics, who else could it be but the cultists of the Cold Flame Church? Faust mentally cursed the ancestors of the 4 mages of the church. The monster they summoned had virtually no offensive power, but without a word, it immediately lay upon the observatory and began to absorb mana. This frightened old Mr. Faust, his mustache twitching. He didn't care about the loss of mana. He issued several commands, and the observatory began to counterattack consciously. 7 objects, identical to the flying stone he had ridden, flew out, turning 180 degrees, with a hexagram facing the sea monster. 7 pale white lightning bolts struck the beast. This was a defensive method Faust had adapted from the original structure of the Mage Tower, combined with his own knowledge. Star projection, derived from the meaning of throwing starlight, fired continuously, shattering the sea beast's body. However, the sea beast's nature meant that as long as it had energy, it would not die. It absorbed energy from the observatory to repair itself, and if the external star projection continued to exert its power, it would absorb more. "I'll finish you first," Faust was decisive. Knowing that his current methods were no match for such a stubborn monster, he set his sights on Thea. Grasping her right wrist with his left hand, he raised his right hand, palm pointed at Thea, and pop, he fired 5 purple missiles in quick succession. Faust didn't want to waste energy fighting the sea beast, and Thea didn't want to fight him head-on with his back to the observatory and his abundant magical power. As long as they could knock down the building, the enemy's true strength would be no match for Mr. Inner Eyes. With a delicate turn, he dodged the missiles and continued to open a hole in the void, sending another fierce flood of water crashing down. Faust was caught between a rock and a hard place. He couldn't defend the tower, and the enemy wouldn't engage him even if he tried. Thea's flying skills were 100 times superior to his own. If he tried to evade, the vast expanse of the sky wouldn't stop him. Who the hell are you? I don't know you. Faust no longer cared about the artifact. Without his observational skills, he couldn't discern Thea's strength, but after a sustained burst of intense magic power, and seeing no signs of fatigue, he knew she was a formidable foe. He was already considering a compromise. You don't know me, Thea replied, her true colors infuriating. I'm such a famous lady, and you claim not to know me. He had to teach her a lesson. Seawater poured endlessly into the small, airtight space, with nowhere to go. It pulled within its confines, and the observatory's gate was already half submerged. Thea, like the flooded Jinshin temple, was a relentless convulsion of wind and waves. The immense pressure would demolish the two-story building if even the slightest malfunction in its magic flowed. What do you want? I'll give you everything I have. Faust could sense the rapidly depleting power of his beloved observatory, and the rate was accelerating. His conviction of the cold flame church's madness deepened. Such a fine ancient structure, yet they wanted to destroy it instead of seizing it? Bang! Thea ignored him and continued her tower-shattering battle. She drew Merlyn's sword and activated its inherent ice storm. The spell startled even Thea herself, twice as powerful as her own. Fist-sized hailstones rained down into the small space, densely packed throughout the area. Even Thea herself was affected, not to mention Faust, whose flying skills were substandard and who only relied on external aids for prudence. His gloomy face was struck repeatedly, and he lost his balance and fell headfirst into the sea. It's freezing. Is this the level of magic? Thea finally gained a first-hand understanding of the magic of Merlyn's era. The ice storm raged for a full 5 minutes. The space itself was completely filled with seawater, and combined with the summon winds, the temperature plummeted by 50 degrees. The observatory was finally destroyed in the 3rd minute of the storm. First the windows, then the doors, and finally the entire brick structure and foundation. The powerful waters completely destroyed the former magic tower, destroying all magical materials, leaving only bricks and rubble. Thea surveyed her handiwork, finding no loot, and commanded the sea beast to pull Faust from the sea. The north wind blew, the snowflakes drifted, and even she, who had undergone numerous divine transformations, felt the cold. How much more so could Faust, a mortal wearing only a robe and having been immersed in the sea for 5 minutes? The long-faced middle-aged man no longer held the arrogance he had when they first met. He didn't complain even when being roughly dragged out by the sea beast. He was completely frozen unconscious, his face ashen, only slightly warm at the heart. Chilblains had already appeared on his hands and feet. Thea took one last look at the small space, which was completely destroyed. She reached out to take the middle-aged man, cancelled the sea beast's summons, and opened a portal back to Malcolm's cave. Is this the guy who attacked you? Thea said, somewhat taking credit, as she tossed the nearly frozen Faust in front of them. Old Ma and Mr. Knight were chatting around the fire. They had both seen her teleport so effortlessly, so they weren't surprised. They both looked at the middle-aged man. It seems so, Mr. Knight said, unsure. The contrast between Faust's former self and his current, lifeless image was too stark. He wasn't entirely sure. That's the guy. Malcolm had achieved straight A's in his training with the Assassin's League. He knew anyone he'd met once, as long as they hadn't turned to ash. Thea reached out and touched Faust's brow, a faint surge of magic waking him up. Then, she cast 2 seals to block his magic, then signaled to Old Ma, you may now seek revenge and interrogate. While direct telepathic reading would have been the most convenient, Thea brought the man back conscious to allow Old Ma to vent his anger. Malcolm had been through torture many times and was incredibly skilled at it. Mr. Faust wasn't a man of strong will either, and after a few lashes of the whip, he began to speak in a flurry of questions. The ambush on Old Ma was indeed his own idea. He was meditating in the observatory when it sent him an extremely dangerous signal, akin to a catastrophic event. Unsure of its meaning, he harnessed the observatory's immense magical power and performed a divination beyond his capacity. The results were ambiguous, but the clear indications were Malcolm and his companions. He struck first, clashing with a demon within Jason Blood, resulting in a mutually devastating defeat. He felt quite happy on the way back, believing the catastrophic event to be for these 2 individuals. He never expected that just when he had recovered from his injuries with the help of the magic of the observatory, the real disaster came. The tower was toppled and he was captured in one go. Now Faust looked at Thea, who was sitting by the fire, and his eyes were full of regret. Chapter 424 Malcolm's Path to Strengthening. But regrets were pointless. He answered Malcolm's questions truthfully, finally revealing the discovery of the Temple of Morgan Le Fay in Peru. "What do we do with this guy?" Malcolm asked Thea, knocking Faust unconscious with a punch. He remembered his daughter as a hero. "As you wish," Thea said, turning away. Faust was no good. He had caused a catastrophic disaster to the world in the future event, Evil Forever. It was a good idea to deal with him beforehand. With a snap, Malcolm grabbed Faust's forehead and chin, and with a flick of his hands, ended his sinful life. "Come back with me first, and we'll discuss our next plan," Thea said to the two of them, giving Malcolm a secret wink. Unsure of her intentions, Malcolm, who truly needed to recover, nodded in agreement. The three of them passed through the portal, emerging from the desolate cave into a room steeped in technological sophistication. "This is my lab in Metropolis. You should get some rest." Thea poured them each a glass of water. Jason Blood, sensing they needed to discuss privately, tactfully left. While reuniting them in Star City would be a good idea, Thea didn't want to see Malcolm and Oliver clash. Robert S.R.'s life was at stake, and the vengeance of his father's murder was difficult to resolve. Malcolm was both Tommy's father and Oliver's father's murderer. Oliver found it difficult to navigate the relationship between his best friend and his sister. The best solution was to keep them apart, never to see each other again. Father and daughter discussed their experiences since their separation. Thea specifically mentioned Tommy's divine blood injection, urging Malcolm to stop his hesitation. She then handed him a vial of genetic enhancement fluid from the lab. At this point, all of their relatives had been enhanced. As for universal access to genetic enhancement fluid, Thea considered it a mere thought before abandoning it. The stakes are too high to offer free injections. The exorbitant price tag would create severe social divisions, making the wealthy and powerful even more powerful and the poor even more powerless to resist. Others aside, once the genetic enhancement fluid hits the market, Batman will undoubtedly explode. Every villain will have one: a Joker injected with the enhancement fluid, a Penguin enhanced with the enhancements, a Scarecrow enhanced with the enhancements. The danger level in Gotham will skyrocket. The scene will be too terrifying and too beautiful. Maintaining the status quo is the only way forward. "Well," Thea said, arranging her words, "I've come up with a way to forcibly activate your bloodline. How do you do it? You don't have to do much. Inject the divine blood and the genetic enhancement fluid separately to get your body into optimal condition. We'll begin in 3 days." 3 days later, Malcolm, having received a series of enhancements, stood there in high spirits, watching Thea at work. He had a profound experience. After the divine blood and the enhancement fluid, his body felt rejuvenated. His previously declining physical fitness felt like it had returned to its peak 20 years ago. The feeling of strength, speed, and stamina returning to peak levels was intoxicating. Jason Blood had fully recovered from his injuries over the past 3 days. Standing beside Malcolm, he watched Thea, who had been drawing a magic circle on the ground for 3 days in the distance. "Your daughter is very kind to you. But can this really awaken a bloodline?" Mr. Knight was a little skeptical. In his impression, not even Merlyn could do it. If it was possible, it was possible, and if it wasn't possible. If a mage were that easy to awaken, the world would be filled with them long ago. Malcolm glanced at him but said nothing. Thea had been working tirelessly for 3 days, and there was no way he was giving up just yet. Mr. Knight was right. Merlyn certainly couldn't do it. His time was too long ago, and modern mages couldn't match the power of his time. However, over the millennia, magic had become more refined and ingenious than in ancient times, forging a new path. Furthermore, Merlyn's vision was too high, focused on higher levels. He didn't have the time to worry about the initiation rituals of a mage apprentice. This created the objective reality that Merlyn couldn't achieve it, but Thea could. The magic circle before them was a fusion of modern and ancient magic. Its most crucial element was the use of Zatanna and her daughter's ironic magic, transforming the impossible into the possible, forcing Malcolm's previously sparse, almost invisible bloodline to flow. Then, using immense magical power to flush and reconstruct it, it was theoretically possible. Thea had created a vast ironic magic circle, incorporating much of Sagan's knowledge. This circle could be considered a culmination of contemporary techniques. She tossed Malcolm 3 gems, each containing 3 powerful healing spells, created using gem magic. As Malcolm entered the magic circle, Thea began chanting the incantation. She had to recite the entire spell backwards, a task so demanding that, despite her current intelligence, she stumbled and blanched. Fortunately, with the help of a magic circle and several precious items donated by the Cold Flame Church, she made the first step without incident. A faint shadow of magic had already begun to appear within Malcolm. "Hold on. Now is the crucial moment," Thea shouted, reaching out to draw the staff of the dead king. When she had summoned the sea beast to overturn Faust's observatory, it had returned some of its magic power to the staff before fading into nothingness. Thea had originally considered absorbing this non-attributed magic herself, but after much deliberation, she decided against it. This magic, drawn from that alien dimension over the centuries, was scattered and impure. For Thea, it represented only 2 or 3 years' worth of magic power, a mere icing on the cake. Using it to strengthen Malcolm through the magic circle would make a world of difference. A timely help would be a welcome relief. Thea raised the staff, directing the magic power along the path of the magic circle, converging on Malcolm's center. The non-attributed magic power activated the blood-red magic circle, flooding Malcolm's body. The once faint, candle-like magic power was nourished, visibly thriving. "Is that all?" the knight asked, curious, watching the excitement unfold. Not even close. Thea wasn't as optimistic. Purification, first of all, meant extraction. Malcolm's current magic power only allowed him to extract it, but success was still a long way off. Seeing Malcolm's body sway slightly, Thea knew his magic power had reached its limit. She stopped the non-attribute magic output, and a small formation appeared within the magic circle, following the same steps as Damien's that day. This was the true bloodline purification formation. Chapter 425, Meeting Lady Wu, updated 2/10 for Alliance Leader Olimu. If Thea's own magical reaction rate was 10, meaning without any magic arrays or spells, whether it involved jumping off a cliff, sustaining a serious injury, recalling memories, or awakening her mage bloodline, the chance was 10%. Damien's was only 3, and Malcolm's was probably less than half. But now, with the help of modern magic, he had finally reached this point. The process was excruciating, though. The purification array constantly drained his body, and every second felt like hell. Malcolm, after all, was old enough to understand that gain was proportional to reward. His willpower was even stronger than Damien's, and he gritted his teeth and persevered. Thea watched him constantly. Whenever Malcolm's magic power was about to run out, she would manually inject some, and then the array would purify it again, draining it again, and Thea would replenish it. Twice, he couldn't hold on any longer and used the magic gems Thea had given him to heal his body. While his body recovered, the mental drain was unavoidable, and he could only endure the agonizing second by second. After replenishing his magic power for the 4th time, a drop of his own magic power finally gathered within Malcolm. Thea quickly stopped the magic circle. She was exhausted. "Is that all? It seems to be somewhat sensitive, but the effect is mediocre." The knight, who had been watching the show, sounded a little disappointed. Thea didn't bother to pay attention to him. No wonder he was only an ordinary knight in the first place, he was so incompetent. Besides, this wasn't a movie. What effects were expected? Should a mage apprentice's bloodline enlightenment produce earth-shattering phenomena? It was an international joke. She checked the magic power in the staff and saw that it was minimal. She simply injected it all into Old Ma and gave him a few spell books to read so that he could cast a few spells. Malcolm was an adult who had undergone rigorous training, in other words, a professional-level character, unlike Damien, who was just a small character. Thea had given him some magic power, and after resting for a while, though he was trembling and washed out, he was remarkably energetic, his eyes sparkling. He took a deep breath, and his steps became increasingly steady as he walked out of the magic circle. Thea reached out for a high five, a childish gesture that embarrassed Malcolm, but he didn't want to spoil the fun. The eccentric, mute knight stared at Malcolm again and again. "You're getting there, but you're still a long way off." Father and daughter had grown accustomed to his style of speech. He was just that way, serious and rigid, and inflexible. However, consistency in words and deeds was a strength. At least he wouldn't backstab anyone. "What new abilities are there?" Thea asked curiously. She had a unicorn tattoo, while Damien had a dark attribute with increased damage. According to records, each magic type awakening, whether strong or weak, would have an ability that matched their personality. Malcolm remained silent, His eyes closed as he pondered for a moment. Then, with a leap, he spun lightly in midair, vanishing in an instant. A gentle breeze blew by, and when he reappeared, he was 10 meters away. Invisibility? Haste? Or perhaps a spatial spell? Several well-known spells flashed through Thea's mind, but none of them seemed like the right ones. She waited quietly for Malcolm to explain. The message my bloodline has imparted to me is wind walk. I can transform into the wind. Currently, I can only draw upon its power, but in the future, I'll be able to control it and even transform it into a hurricane. Thea nodded inwardly. This ability perfectly suited Old Ma's personality. He could fight, hide, and most importantly, escape easily. Generations of Merlyns have awakened to the wind attribute. This talent is average, but has potential for development. With Old Ma's diligent research, he might even develop new abilities. Talent is only one aspect, acquiring more knowledge and accumulating mana are the true path. Thea was about to urge Old Ma to study hard and improve himself, but he hesitated and added, I think I have another ability. Huh? Thea was stunned. Although her unicorn tattoo had changed twice, it was still one ability. What did Old Ma mean by another ability? It's a rather mysterious ability. I can't quite explain it, but I'll show you. He hadn't wasted those 3 days. He contacted his subordinates and vaguely knew that the Cold Flame Church had been utterly crushed and nearly annihilated by a group of enemies. He realized that his daughter was no longer the little girl he had learned martial arts from. She was now a powerful mage. If he had any questions, he would be wise to ask her. He stretched out his hand and drew strange lines in the air, summoning 7 illusory stone tablets depicting hexagrams. Malcolm frowned, as if trying to decide his next move. Thea quickly stopped him. With her immense theoretical knowledge, she understood. This was nothing else but the power of the Faust Observatory. The sea beast had absorbed approximately 30% of the observatory's magic power, then returned approximately 15% to the Death King's staff. After being consumed and purified by the magic circle, this magic power now reflected in Malcolm's body should be less than 10% of the original total. These magical powers, assisted by the purification of Old Ma's bloodline, unexpectedly merged with him, granting him a glimmer of divination. Shia dabbled in various schools of magic, including mystical arts, rituals, and curses, but she had barely studied divination. She saw no need to do so. With the memories of a time traveler, she knew most of the world's secrets and the dynamics of events. Divination drained her life and energy, making it meaningless to her. Don't use this ability again. If I'm not mistaken, it's the skill of an astrologer, predicting the future through observation methods vastly different from modern astronomy. It's too much of a burden on you. Promise me, don't use it lightly. Shia looked at Old Ma sternly. These are words of wisdom. Listen to them. Don't try to control a power you can't control. A sudden female voice interrupted the conversation between father and daughter. A graceful and extraordinary woman, dressed in a floor-length purple dress and cloth shoes, dressed simply except for a headband, slowly stepped out. Who are you? Mr. Knight asked uncertainly, as if witnessing something unbelievable. Thea delivered the answer directly, bowing slightly. Madame Xanadu, long time no see. Xanadu's courtesy was impeccable. Descendant of Merlyn, I told you we would meet again, madam. Your health seems. Thea noticed something with a casual glance. Madame Xanadu's strength had declined significantly from a century ago. Even stranger, she was constantly under the scourge of some immense power. Her inherent strength eroding bit by bit. The demigod who had once wielded Ruai to trap Thea and Diana now looked no stronger than those of the Cold Flame Church. What had happened to her over the past century? She had actually deteriorated to this degree. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.